Adam from the press. Just a reminder to those members who aren't on the board that this is a meeting in public rather than a public meeting. So if you want to raise your hand, I will try and bring you in to public questions at the end of the session. But I'll obviously have to get through the business of the board as well, so I'll do my best on that. Again, we're on Teams. This is an irregular function for us in the ICB. We probably do this once or twice a year. We generally meet in person, but it does mean members of the public can join us a bit more easily. But being on Teams, the flow of conversation is sometimes a bit more difficult. So we need to make sure we maintain the etiquette of hand raising and turning off microphones if we're not actually speaking. So without further ado, just some welcomes. So welcome again to Ruth Hughes, who is the interim chief exec for OneCare. So welcome, Ruth, and welcome to Sue Porto, who is the new chief exec for Sirona. So welcome, Sue. I've got some apologies. So Joe Walker, Steve Peacock, and David Perry, who are three chief execs from our local authorities, who are all at the LGA conference this week, but they're ably deputised by Matt Lenny, Hugh Evans, and Anne Clark. I've got apologies from John Hayes and from Eugene FL, and Stuart Walker is representing Eugene. So can I just check if we've got any other apologies, Lucy, other than the ones I've mentioned?
Maybe Will Warrender.
Right, okay, yeah. So Will Wander, who's the chief exec of SWAST. He hasn't contacted me directly, but I see he's declined on the invite. So Will as well. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Can I just check then if there's any declarations of interest or conflicts of interest that anybody wants to raise that they haven't already notified us of, which are attached to the minutes? Is there anything anybody else would like to raise? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we got the minutes of the meeting of the 4th of May for the public board. Is there any comments, questions, or alterations anybody would like to make in respect to those minutes, for those who were there? No? Okay, thanks very much. I'll move on to actions then. The first open action is around the single report for all committees. I've had an update from Emma Gara on how we're progressing on that, but Deb, I think you were leading on this, so I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add to it.
Just to say that what we're doing now is they're loading, they've got the design and all the processing, and they're loading that up. And probably just to flag to board members that what we'll provide going forward, which will be available, is a much more dynamic set of reporting. So if people do want to have a snapshot of it, that is possible, but also it will allow that kind of drill down into the performance data, so that when people ask questions, and Ellen's been quite instrumental in kind of leading some of this design and sharing some of her industry ideas around how we get this moving. So I think it's got us into a much better space, and then obviously we're rolling that out, starting with performance and quality, and then rolling that out across the other committees, so that we have a connection between the data that links all of the committees together, rather than them all sitting as a standalone, which we know isn't kind of real.
Okay, thanks, Deb. And I know Emma circulated that, so she circulated that in the last week, didn't she? If others are interested in seeing that, but by all means, just let us know.
And I wonder, Jeff, whether or not it would be worth in September, depending on the burden of the board agenda, whether it would be useful, or maybe in the next seminar, to take people through it.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Deb. Lisa?
Thanks, Chair. Just to say that we are actually running a dummy run of how we would work a committee using the report in August, at Alan's suggestion. So we'll be able to do that feedback as part of the September meeting.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Unless there's any other questions on that one, I'll move us on to the next action, which was Dave around migrant healthcare and asylum seeker support. And there's an update on the minutes around the Haven. I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add on public board for that.
I'm we can close this action, Jeff. I think we could say we've through close this morning, we've approved further funding to support those services in the short term, supporting the migrant health population, whilst we continue to develop a medium term commissioning plan and service development approach.
Okay, thanks, Dave. The next action was around the role of corporate parents, and the 3 local authority chief execs were going to take this one away. We haven't had any update on it. I think this probably needs to stay on the agenda until Jo joins us next time, because she brought the item to the board, and it would be good for her to just feedback on where she thinks we are with this. So unless there's any other comments on that one, I'll leave it on the agenda until our next meeting. Okay, so then the next one, Shane, was for yourself around the scheme of delegation.
Yeah, Chair, that's all connected into the decision-making framework, which is obviously on the agenda today, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Shane. Ellen, in relation to children's services, you're going to have a discussion with Julie.
Yeah, so basically we did action this and we had it as an agenda item in May. It did identify some shortcomings in the whole process, Jeff. So Lisa and part of the healthcare improvement groups, a piece of work is underway to really understanding what we should be looking at. So I think this is an ongoing piece of work. Lisa, I don't know whether you'd like to come in on this one.
Of course, Ellen, just in terms of, so one of the things that we worked through at the last Children Healthcare Improvement Group was effectively to agree our priorities and set out our work programme, which is we're going to do as a workshop. We will then bring that reporting back through the Outcomes, Quality and Performance Committee, because part of the challenge that we had when we took the item through was, whilst we look in some areas in great deal of depth, in other areas it's very superficial. So how do we actually get the key metrics that mean that we're actually improving the lives of our children? So it's a piece of ongoing work, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I think we can take that off the actions here then, if you've clearly both got a grip of it. The next one was around acute collaboration, and Maria, this is one for yourself and Eugene. We talked about updates coming to the board and added to the forward plan. I don't know whether you've got anything to add on that today.
No, we did supply an update. I don't quite know where it's got to. It was just our normal monthly report. Okay. With that rhythm. Over the course of the last month, we've had an exec to exec, partly because there'd been a lot of changing faces across the 2 exec teams. We hadn't had one for 18 months. It was facilitated by David Dalton and was very helpful for us to flesh out where we are with our clinical strategy and thinking about next steps, which of course we'll be talking to Shane about in our next cabinet meeting. Okay, lovely, thanks Maria. And then the final action we had was around maternity services, and Rosie, I think we're going to bring this back to the board as a board seminar.
Yes, please, and in September, Lisa's just advised, so that
okay.
Should be able to come off now.
So, I mean, I think that'll be really worthwhile if we can coincide it with the day of the board, and if it doesn't make it too long, yeah. that would be ideal, because we need to make sure it fits with diaries. So, but that would be really helpful. And Julie, just to sorry, you're probably
going to ask me the question, but go on.
I was just going to say, I think, although it came up under the heading of maternity in Ockenden and Kirkup, we did say we'd extend it around the lessons it has for lots of other services. So just a slight rewording. I think you're going to do that anyway, aren't you, Rosie?
I have already enacted it, Julie. So I met with Mary and Steve last night and we started planning. So we'll do a piece broadly around maternity, but then we'll do a much broader piece around culture, patient safety, transparency, and what the big publications mean for us and how we should attend to that as board members. So that's what we're working up ready for September. Steve and Mary will both come, and any of the CNOs that are free. So as you exactly said, we'll make it broader than.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. Vicky?
I was just wondering if with that, Rosie, it was possible to bring in the kind of work we've done locally around maternal mental health support.
That'd be great. Thank you, Vicky. I'll pick it up with the outside of here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. That's helpful. Any other questions or comments on any of the actions? No? Okay. In that case, I'll move us on to the next agenda item, which is the Chief Exec's report. Shane.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, I'm not going to read it verbatim. People have it in their papers. I'm highlighting 5 things. I know I talk about bringing 3 things that are important, and this time I've gone for 5. Apologies, I'll try and keep the 3 in future, but I think it's important. There are 5 things that are very important to us at the moment that I think is important to share with the board. The first area is just the ICB structures and the reorganisation of the ICB. So as was agreed at the last board meeting, we've now entered into another phase of reorganisation for the ICB, primarily focused on what is our core role and function, but also to acknowledging the fact that we have to find 30% running cost reductions. So as you can see from the report, we agreed a 5-stage approach. Stage 1 and 2 are very much about engaging with our staff and engaging with our partners. We had a large all-staff event, or certainly 270 staff attended event at the beginning of June. We've also had a partners and a staff event in later June. And the whole purpose was to reflect on what the ICB does and to try to create that role and purpose. As you can see from the paper, we obviously need to move forward into creating our future state now, looking at our operating model and then looking at how that works across teams and functions, etc. Just to make the board aware that we have secured the support of the North East Commissioning Support Team. So they're an NHS organisation in the North East who help organisations with challenges around organisational development, etc. Because as you will probably appreciate, this will be a very difficult process for those who work in the ICB, because clearly we're looking at new roles, functions and reduction in size, as we've made that very clear before. And we're working with Next to help us through that process and to try to design an ICB that meets the partners' requirements, but also can live within the cost envelope that we have. And there'll be a lot more on this board as we work our way through the next couple of months. The second area in the report is just to reflect, we submitted our operational plan as was agreed with the board. NHS England then responded to the operational plan. The letter is included in Appendix 1 of my report. And what I've also included in the report then is just a summary of the actions we're taking as a result of the letter. I've explicitly brought it here today because it was an explicit ask of NHS England that the board were made aware of this letter and also were aware of what we're doing about it. So I'm not going to go into detail, but it is there for your record. And clearly, if people have any thoughts or comments and questions, then I'm more than happy to take those comments and questions. Okay, the third area, which I think is really important just to surface today, is, as we're very well aware, last Friday, the 30th, the NHS launched its workforce plan, long-term workforce plan. What I've tried to include in my report is a summary of that workforce plan. Obviously, I refer to lots of numbers, and they are national numbers because we don't obviously at this point in time have a local reflection on what does it mean for us in BNSSG. As you will see, it's very focused on the issue of, can we train more people? Can we retain the people we have? And then how about the reform of the way in which we do our work and look at our workforce? And again, I've included some detail in that. And again, I'm more than happy to take questions. But I think what's important to note, this is really new in the inbox. We are sitting down, looking as a system, what is the best way for us to respond to this ask? And it's a brilliant ask. And I have to say, I think it's very fair to say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to really look at how we recruit, how we train and how we retain and how we develop our workforce. But what is very clear in the document is the ICB will play a pivotal role in coordinating and making sure this is a success. And therefore, as a board, we will have to be certain that we can do that well. We can resource it. We can connect it into our people committee because that's the place where we should be connecting it into. So we've some work to do to try to create the process we're going to use. Joe Hicks, as Chief People Officer, is working across the Southwest, but probably on a national level as well, looking at how we're all going to address this. And we will bring a paper back to the board in September when we next meet, which will hopefully provide the framework for how we are going to do this. But I think it is just an important thing to note, Chair, that in the context of the 30% reduction to our running cost, we can't simply consume this piece of work and assume we can do so within our current running costs. And therefore, an important piece of work is working with NHS to understand what the supporting resources are, because quite clearly, take 30% out of our running costs and manage this major change program, I'm not too sure that can be delivered. Those two parts of the equation meet. So we've got work to do to make sure we can secure that resources. Fourth thing then, Chair, is just to reflect on Charlotte Keel medical practice procurement. You will have seen, or any members of the public will have seen, and obviously the board will have seen publicly, we were obviously procuring a replacement provider in the Charlotte Keel area. That bidder was One Medicare, who won the bid. But unfortunately, in the post-contract award and the due diligence process, etc., unfortunately, we came to a point where we had to collapse the procurement. We were unable to go to contract signature and actually getting the contract implemented. We will be doing, a considerable lessons learned, why it is so difficult for us in this particular community, in this particular practice, to get sustained service in the way we want to get it. So there's lessons to be learned. The most important thing in this phase is to make sure we keep patients safe. And as you will see, is that Bristol, who are the incumbent, will be carrying on and delivering that service in that phase as we begin to understand what is the best way to deliver a service for that population. And then the final bit of my report, and I'm taking slight liberty, but it's just to do a first year reflection, Chair, because I think not only is it the ICB 1 year old, but I think there's a lot of reflection going on this week because the NHS is 75 years old as well. And it's just an opportunity to reflect on the success we've had. And again, I'm not going to read verbatim what I had written. But I think I just have to say, I think I'm hugely proud of what we've done as an ICB in the first year. I think, we have begun to really strengthen partnerships. We've driven and generated a 5-year plan, a 1-year plan in terms of a strategy. And we are starting to deliver out services and changes as a partnership. And I think the reflection even on this board today, I know this is not what other boards look like across England. I know that there are other ICBs who don't have the commitment from partners that we have, and the engagement with partners that we have. We've been able to deliver improved performance last year. We've, in fact, even yesterday, I'm led to believe that from an unscheduled care perspective, we were at a level that we haven't been at before for quite a long time. I think Lisa talked to me about the Opal status as something she hasn't seen in her time within our system. So I think it's important that we sometimes look at the difficulty and how hard it is to work as partners, and it is hard. We also just need to reflect on the successes of bringing this partnership together and starting to make a difference, Chair. And that's what I've tried to summarise in my first year reflections. I've also given a personal reflection because I think one of the things that we do, we often think of health and social care and all this kind of stuff, but actually one of the most important parts for me in the year was actually getting out to one of the community groups, to getting out to the Square Food Foundation, and that just understanding the difference that we can make, not in the big shiny buildings we call our hospitals, or not even in the service delivery of care, but actually looking at a group of adults with learning disabilities and helping them to learn how to cook food, understand food, and the difference it made to their lives. And there were individuals in that group who, through their carers, were telling me that until they came to this group, had never cooked, and as a result, had pretty much lived on takeaway food. Now, this, so these are the kind of things that I appreciate. We spend billions of pounds every year in healthcare and health and social care. But actually, I think what you'll see in our strategy is the importance of getting right upstream and really getting to the causes of the causes, as opposed to really focusing on delivery. So a slight liberty, Chair, for me to take a reflective piece in my update. But I just think it's a really important moment that we've had a year, we're in the right direction, we've done some good things, and we need to build on that, Chair.
No, thanks, Shane. I'll open up for questions now. And I don't think it is a liberty. I think it's important to reflect back on the journey we've been on over the last year. There's been a lot to do just in establishing an ICB, but by way of both process structures, engagement, but the heart of what we've done has been collaboration and working as a collective. Even when those conversations are difficult, we have to maintain that, because as many of us who've been in this system a little while know, direction or organisationally centric approaches will not resolve the issues that we have and the challenges we're going to face going forward in both health and social care. So I think it all goes well, and I think it lines up nicely for the conversation we're going to have on the rest of the agenda items today about how we're going to make a difference in taking those things forward. So let me open up to questions or observations. So I've got Ellen, Dominic, Steve, and then Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Shane. Very clear as ever. And can I just endorse what you just said about the achievements? I think, you know, we have come a long way. My question was, again, back to workforce. We've got the long-term workforce plan on top of a workforce plan that we are trying to put together as a system anyway. So we've sort of got two pieces of work sort of butted into each other, which are involved, even though one is more sort of medium term and one's sort of longer term. Can you just say something more about that request for support and how that might impact on timing, Shane? And also, can I just ask Joe Hicks, sorry to put you on the spot, Joe, but you're a number of months in now, and I'm just wondering whether you've got any asks of the NEDs around the table or the partners in helping you in this piece of work that I know you are driving forward. Thanks.
Thanks. So shall I respond to each question at a time, Chair, if that's okay? Because they'll be very different questions. So in terms of, we as of yet do not know what the resourcing will be, Ellen, for the workforce plan from an NHS perspective, okay? So what I'm raising to the board is we will work with NHSE clearly to try to deliver this. And we will need to be resourced. It's very early on. I mean, it's barely been a week since the plan was put out there, but it's very clear that Joe will work to try to make sure we can create what you might call a people function in the ICB, which is right size to deliver the strategy. But at the moment, I have no idea what that right size is and have not had indication yet that there will be resources coming with it. But that's part of us, you know, getting involved with NHSE and seeing where we're going.
Thanks, Shane. Joe, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Alan. So in terms of, so Shane sort of referenced what we will be doing from an ICB perspective, from a system perspective. And thank you for the question around NEDs and also system partners. So I'll be working with CPOs across the system to take a look at the plan, to have a think about actually what does that mean in relation to a BNSSG. In my mind, a workforce and culture plan, because obviously it's about retention, retain and reform, as Shane has already mentioned, but very important that we focus on our existing workforce as well as and keeping them, as well as the workforce that will come in the future. And I think that's a system response, and I think that's the responsibility of all the CPOs, myself and my network and system colleagues in relation to that. So that will be something that we will be collectively working on. And in terms of the support from NED colleagues, it will be really as we work through that and we connect those elements up and we bring discussions through People Committee and through our other committees, that we are just able to bring that alignment and get the support that we need for that future, really. So that's the direction of travel. And just to, I guess, reassure you that we have our existing workforce plan. That's very much the now. And as you rightly point out, that is both short and medium term. And this long-term plan gives us a bridge to that future. We want to go broader than what is in that plan, because I think, as we recognised earlier in closed board, that element doesn't include social care or our voluntary services either. So we need a holistic system plan. So it's also about how we build that bridge to that future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jo. And I think that leads in nicely to what will be our next item, which is about decision making and where those decisions are being made and where we ensure the scrutiny and accountability is there for those decisions. So let's wait and see. Dominic?
So just some brief reflections back on Shane's reflections of the first year. We have a tendency as public servants to self-flagellate because there's so much to do and it's such hard work, but actually it is important to stop, take time and notice what is going well. And I think that this ICB can be proud of what it has achieved over the past year. We've addressed many of the things that we need to address. even those who've been knocking around the system for a long time, whether they're executive leads or chief executives, we've all started to behave differently. And I would like to commend and thank Shane in particular for his stewardship of the system. He's been a breath of fresh air, frankly, and that's been really, really helpful. So thank you for that, Shane. And I look forward to Ready, Steady, Cook, hosted by Shane Devlin.
Thanks, Dominic. Steve.
How do I follow that? Thank you. And I was going to just comment as well on what's been achieved, I think. So it's very clear that when we started, we needed to build solid foundations around collaboration and partnership. We are one system and we'll work as one system to succeed. And I think that that is now becoming the lived reality. So how we join things up, how we share and mitigate risks, and how we then deliver improvements across our system is now becoming the way of working. Now, the focus has been from day one, how do we reduce health inequalities across our system? And we're beginning to see how we might do that. Now, of course, the proof is in looking at the data sets as we make decisions around investments and as we make decisions around pathways of care. We recognise the interdependencies across our system, and we also recognise it's about health and care. So the work that we're doing with the unitary authorities, I think, is significant and important. There are challenges, of course, as we go forward, and Shane and the board are not ducking those. We do have to build in efficiencies, and we do have to ensure that we do that in a way that doesn't impact on quality, but actually helps us enhance quality and access to services. But that will mean over time that we will need to reshape and maybe refocus some of the work that we do and some of the services that we are supporting and how we support them, importantly, to make sure that we are addressing inequalities. So I'm looking forward now, as we get better grip, as we get better focus, to moving to that point where we create headroom in our finances by the collective effort so that we can innovate and then accelerate and do things in a really smart way. And that's where I think we're heading. So the board and every member of our partnerships should be proud, I think. And Shane, well done on leading the teams to get us to where we are. Still a long way to go, but I think we should be proud. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I just endorse what Steve said. I think it feels very different at board than it did in shadow form or even in July last year. And I think it's for the positive, and I think it will help us for those next steps that have been described. Shane, thank you for your paper. As always, it's really got lots in it. I just wanted to pick up specifically around not necessarily ICB structure, but ICB form, if you like, what the core purpose of the ICB is. And looking at the stages 3 and 4, which are talking about the future state and the new operating model that happening over July and August, I just, some papers later in the agenda tease us about where your thinking is going around how as a system resource we can do things together. The next paper particularly, how are board members and partners being engaged at a formative stage? Because it reads as though the future state and the operating model will have some draft form in them by the end of August. How will board be engaged before the, if you like, so that everyone around the table is aligned and agrees and can tease out any particular issues they may have? So because that's going to be quite an important next step about how the ICB functions in the new world, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Yeah, we've taken a approach which is setting up a design team within the organisation, and clearly then we have sort of workshops and breakpoints. I did speak to Jeff about what's the role of. So by the way, partners are invited to those workshops, and that's fine. But I think particularly the non-execs have a role which is slightly different from many of our other partners. So I haven't agreed fully with Jeff how we do that. Okay. But I think there is a separate strand for the non-execs because you are truly independent of the system. And I appreciate you are a director of the system, of course you are, but you're here as an independent member. And therefore, I think we have to design something slightly different than what we've designed in this process to get the independent non-executive members' views into it. So we've designed a process which has been a very generic process for staff and partners. But actually, I think there's something slightly different, and we haven't designed it, Alison, that we need to get, well, I need to get, as a chief executive, your independent view, because most of the other people will not be that independent, because it's their life. Do you see what I'm saying? So there is something that is a process, and we haven't quite worked that out yet. I know Joe and I, we met with we all met with North East Commissioning Service yesterday, and we haven't quite bottomed out how we do that. But I think as chief executive, I need an independent sounding board as much as anything, and I think the Neds play that independent sounding board. That's my early thinking about Alison.
Thanks very much, Shane. Look forward to that.
Alison, we've had a brief conversation about that. I guess many of us on this board will have had a lot of experience of organisational change, particularly during austerity, and the value of that external review as well as NED review and that challenge process. So check and challenge. And one of the challenges we've got is we've built something new, but we're having to change that by 30%. So there may not be that experience around the country who's done it before us. So we will have to think about how we introduce that challenge process. But I have to say, if we just do that internally, then we probably won't be bold enough in the decisions that we make. Has been my experience of it, and I suspect others will be in a similar position. So I have had that conversation with Shane about how do we make sure that particularly the non-exec challenge is one that is a challenge. It doesn't just accept the accepted norms. So we'll wait and see how that progresses. Matt.
It's just to build on that, actually, Jeff. So in the same spirit, local authorities going through significant budget reductions over a series of years, there may be some things that we can bring in from our learning, what went well, what didn't go so well, and we'd certainly be really happy to offer that in as part of the process, however that can be done best. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And there is that, there is that learning in the system where the local authority who's probably taking 60p in the pound out of everything that you spend. So there is some good learning on it. I suppose just on some of the reflections on what Shane has just said, I haven't heard a great deal from local government partners or from OneCare, and I think Ruth, just perhaps starting with yourself. Haven't had the opportunity to speak to GPs in a number of settings recently and visit practices. In primary care and particularly in GP practices, I've had a lot of feedback around connectivity and how their voice is heard and how they make sure that they're connected into the system. Would the explanation that people have given about where we are as a partnership resonate with you, or do you think there's a disconnect with our primary care participants?
I think that's a good question, and I suspect the answer is there's a spectrum of opinion there. I think some are very closely engaged, and I think the locality partnerships offer a really good vehicle for that. I suspect there are others who are very, very close to the coalface, who are pretty much head down and just doing the day-to-day job. So I think it's a lot better than it was. There is always more work to be done in terms of making sure that general practice is not, is participating and not feeling that it is being done to. There's always that position, but we're a lot further forward than we have been in the past.
Thank you, Ruth. That's really helpful. And, there's a real commitment here to make sure we're hearing everybody's voice in the system, not just those who speak loudest or those who carry the biggest budgets. We do need to make sure that we are citizen-centred in the way we're approaching things. So that's really helpful. Just from local government partners, you've heard that conversation on where people think we've travelled over the last year. Just any reflections for yourself, I think would be really useful. So perhaps Anne and then Hugh.
Mute.
Sorry, everybody. I think I would echo some of the things that Ruth has just said. I would say that if I was talking to a group of frontline social workers, they would very much understand our closer working with the locality partnership and what we're seeking to achieve there. I was in a conversation with a group of leaders in adult social care yesterday and talking about how do we best introduce the integrated care strategy to our frontline staff. And we're still pondering on that one, because when they're at the front line, they can switch off very quickly if they feel they're being overburdened with things that belongs to somebody else in the organisation to manage. So we'd really want to try and make it live through probably some lunch and learn sessions in terms of, so what does this mean in terms of direction of travel? And if we emphasise the prevention and helping people to help themselves element of it, I think it will begin to resonate. So it's really about targeting the groups and delivering the messages that will mean most, I think.
Yeah, and that's helpful, Anne. I mean, I know from my professional experience, when you talk to frontline staff about strategy, it's a sure way to send them to sleep, isn't it? And I think that is our role as an ICB, is to make sense of that strategy into some delivery opportunities. Yes. And then health improvement groups and our locality partnerships make sure that becomes reality on the ground. It's always a challenge when you speak to people directly on strategy. We will get a response of, you're talking in management speak, even though we don't feel as if we are. So, but it'd be interesting to see how we play that out now over the next year to make what's contained in that strategy, and what we'll talk about some of that tomorrow at the Integrated Care Partnership, a reality. Hugh?
Yeah, I agree with Anne. We've got thousands of colleagues to convince of the veracity and validity of the strategic thinking that we've undertaken. I have to say also that this year, the conversations are better than they've ever been in my experience. I think, you know, the leadership is jockeying, everybody's finding their place in the leadership of it, and it is it's highlighting issues that we probably always knew were there, issues to do with our operational systems, our strategic systems, the means by which we operate, and it's uncovered a lot of work that we need to do in order to make our systems much more effective and much more coherent. But I genuinely believe that the relationships are pretty sound, and I think as long as we keep on in the direction we're going, this was never going to happen overnight. It's going to be a few years to get it into ship shape, Bristol fashion, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire fashion as well, in order that in order that we have a system to be proud of. But there's loads of positive stuff, and I think, you know, we need to carry on in that vein, really.
Helpful. Any other comments or questions for Shane on his update? I think that leads us in nicely to the next item on the agenda, which is around the operation decision-making framework. I mean, I would say, in the absence of our 3 chief execs from local authorities, I know they will be keen to contribute to this. So whilst the paper does ask for a number of decisions today, I have had some representation from chief execs in local authorities to say that they do want to have a conversation around it. Shane will do that next week at the chief execs group. But I did feel that as a wider board, we should discuss it. There's a lot of work gone into this paper. To put it off until the next board meeting would probably drag us back quite a lot. So I think we can agree some principles, albeit I do think some of the detail will need to be thrashed out. So that's just a precursor to the conversation. But I'll now pass us over to Sarah, and I think Ellie's joined us as well to take us through the next 45 minutes or so.
Thanks, Jeff. I think myself and Sarah agreed that I would take the lead on this one. So apologies, the paper should have said me. I think, colleagues, it's fair to say, and very nice, it was a nice reflection of what's gone well in the year. I think it's fair to say we have struggled at times with decision making, and I think it's, you know, no matter which way we look at it, you know, it is really hard to get partners who have their own governance architecture, their own decision making frameworks, to suddenly come together and make decisions as a system. It's really hard, and we can reflect on some recent decisions that we've taken and go, that doesn't really quite feel the way it should have felt, and actually we need to learn from that. So the purpose of this paper is to try to bring together a lot of the strands of thinking that have been going on for quite a while around the health and care improvement groups and what operationally and the support that we give to them, At the same time, then bringing together a lot of the thinking we were doing at risk appetite and the risk management into one concise document that says, this is how I think we should make decisions in BNSSG. Now, I agree with Jeff in the sense that, you know, we have a meeting as chief executives next Tuesday, Wednesday, and I think it's really important because we've all agreed the most important thing as chief executives we've got to get right is decision making. I think we've reflected on the BCF process, the Better Care Fund process from the last 3 months. We've got to get back, you know, so no matter which way it, decision making is the key important thing moving forward. And what this paper tries to do is bring it all together into one bit. It is a big ask. There are a number, 10 recommendations, and as Jeff said, I'm not too sure we will attempt to approve all 10. That's, I think, what we've got to do is agree this is the right direction of travel. And I do think that very, very quickly, then we do need to sign it off as this is the right thing to do. A lot of these things are starting to happen anyway, the health and care improvement groups, etc. And that's fine, but we've just got to put a framework around it so we don't accidentally run off in all kinds of directions. And that's what the paper is trying to do. Ellie Wetz is on the call. Ellie has been the person who's been leading on all of this. I don't know where we'd be without Ellie in terms of her ability to pull all this stuff together. And Ellie, I suppose it's an opportunity, Jeff. I'm not suggesting we walk through the paper because we shouldn't, but I think it is important. We've got a decent amount of time that maybe Ellie can give an overview of the key parts of this, and then we can get into looking at the kind of, do we agree with that in principle as the direction of travel? If that's okay, Chair, yeah?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Ellie, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So yes, as Shane says, do appreciate there's a fair amount of content in these papers, but the principle we were really trying to promote through this is that we should have a good understanding of the risk of the decisions that we want to make and a common understanding of our shared appetite for risk within the system, noting that each individual organisation has already done a fair amount of work on their own risk appetites for risk in the decisions that they may make, which within the as sovereign organisations in their own right. But when we come together as system partners, and in the spirit of the Health and Care Act, we have a duty to act together to deliver health and care services, certainly for NHS anyway, our NHS partners, then we do need to try and establish a kind of a common understanding and agreed appetite for risk in the context of how we take forward decisions about health and care services for our population. So the first section of the paper presents some options for risk appetite statements further to work undertaken in some workshops. So some thoughts around that would be very helpful. Obviously, there are, what I've done in the paper is presented the risk appetite statement, which had essentially the highest number of hits in the workshops and the surveys, but noting that actually it isn't a fine, you know, it isn't nearly black and white. There's some grey, there's some shades within that. So I've also provided you with the opportunity to have a closer look at the near neighbour risk appetite statements if you feel that a combination of risk appetite statements might be better suited to the BNSSG integrated care system and its appetite for those risk domains. So that's the first bit of the paper. The second, I then have moved us on into trying to think about how we can structure the integrated care system partners in a way that makes sense, reading back into the decision-making framework that was agreed in December. We put that tiering in at the time to try and help us make sense of the level of decision-making authority of the people in the rooms of those groups, absolutely relying on the delegated authority conferred on those individuals in the groups to make those decisions. It aligns to the ICB Board scheme of reservation and delegation to do so. So it's just it's quite it's codified in that way. to try and help set out how we can organise the integrated care system partners. So we agreed in that decision-making paper in December that we would establish health and care improvement groups, and then we've been establishing those over the next couple of months. But what we have always recognised is the domains of those health and care improvement groups are very broad, and they cover a lot of subject areas, a lot of the population and a lot of their health and care needs. So we need to find a way somehow of disaggregating those health and care improvement groups into something which is more focused on driving the operational activity and the improvements that may be, kind of, for want of a better word, commissioned by the health and care improvement groups in pursuit of improving our outcomes. So the paper proposes an operating and decision-making framework and an oversight framework, and the operating and decision-making framework proposes an establishment of operational delivery groups, which are a reconciliation of what we actually already have in the system. Through the Healthier Together model and the previous DCG model, we had a very large amount of steering groups, programme boards, etc. And we've attempted to map some of those. We're still doing that, but it's a really, really busy space. And so what we're trying to do is reconcile all that excellent work that's going on into sensible groupings as determined by the health and care improvement groups leadership teams, the health and care improvement groups leading it through the system into what those sub-operational groups would look like. And then below that, we would assume that the improvement work would be generated through standing up working groups, task and finish groups with a specific area of focus, subject to the problem statement you're trying to, the improvement you're trying to make. So rather than having, again, lots and lots of programme boards without necessarily a clear understanding of what they're delivering, this was a way of trying to chunk it up. We do recognise that that framework needs to be taken in the spirit of a framework, in that it has to be flexed. So I think the example that I've put in the paper is LEADER, for example. That's a national programme board with its own nationally directed governance structure, but it will be childed to the parent group of the Learning Disabilities and Autism Operational Delivery Group by nature. That's where it's neatly fits. Now, it's not a task and finish group, it's not a working group, but for the purposes of presentation, the purposes of understanding where it sits in the system, that's where we would propose that LEADER would feel best as a best fit. Hopefully we haven't got too many exceptions to the rule, otherwise the framework as proposed doesn't necessarily, well, it starts to become null and void. But if we can think about trying to coalesce or everything that we're doing at the moment into this structure, and that we have a uniformity and a read across, so that an operational delivery group working on urgent and emergency care and one working on mental health have the same purpose within the system, and that's what we're just trying to convey. So that's the operating and decision-making framework. Alongside that is the oversight framework. And I do recognise that this suddenly starts to feel quite complicated. But again, these are just groups of people already meeting in the system. These are experts by experience, experts in their field, who offer brilliant insight and into how the ICS is truly running and functioning. And they aren't responsible necessarily for delivery, but they have a really important role in making sure that we are, as system partners, working to achieve what we said we would, either our strategic objectives, joint forward plan, whatever it is. And I've given lots of examples, and please do, if I have included a group, they are really intended to be illustrative. A lot of mapping is going on at the moment. But those oversight groups could be system-wide, or they could gravitate towards the nucleus of one or two of, one of health and care improvement group or one of the operational delivery groups. And then what we're trying to propose, bring it back in full circle, is that those two frameworks are bound by the principle of risk management, so that if there is a decision that needs to be made, whether it's a pathway change or an emerging risk, that the oversight groups with the expertise are brought in to help the operational delivery functions of the framework really best understand, with the highest grade evidence and quality of evidence, really, what the right decision might be in taking a broad approach. Now, that might feel that you have to take, if you're in an operational delivery group, that you may have to take it to lots, and it may feel duplicative, it may feel a bit bogged down with bureaucracy, but the challenge is, if we don't do that and we don't get the right expertise in the room, we may not make the right decision for the population. So the principle of kind of risk management and those thresholds that I've proposed in the paper in terms of how where the operational delivery, which level of the operational delivery group holds the risk at the moment and has oversight within that threshold, and how they bring in the oversight groups to support them in that risk management or decision making. That's how we think the two frameworks would align and complement each other. So I hope that's a helpful summary.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to read the paper and digest it. I think this is what I started with this morning, which is, you know, we come to the board here at the ICB, which has to be the delivery function of the strategy that the ICP has prepared for us. And then we come here and we agree in principle, but how do we turn that principle into practice, I think is the biggest challenge for us. And if not us as a board, then who? So I think there's a number of challenges for us as leaders in the system to make sure that our principles become some element of reality. So lots of hands gone up. That's great. So let's start with Deb, then Dominic, then John, then Lisa, Colin and Matt.
Thanks, Jeff. And Ellie, you've drawn together so many different concepts here. I just wanted to comment on the kind of digital data and technology piece, because almost everything we talk about has got a reliance upon that. And of course, it doesn't sit in one health and care improvement group, for example. Things like our shared care record is right across all of those things, and it's an operational delivery capability. So I know that in the oversight groups, the illustrative, not exhaustive framework, you've got that kind of diagram, the circular diagram. So I think the digital delivery board will sit in there. But one of the things that I just wanted to check is it kind of, there are different things. Some are system wide and some are digital data and technology in support of children's. So we need to make sure that we think about that. And I'm guessing it will be the same for workforce and a whole lot of other things. And then it was just that you're nodding, so that's great. And then it was just an offer that we are looking at reviewing the digital governance, because of course we've got subgroups, things like public facing digital, we've got the beginnings of some data networks and analysts networks, we've got cyber, we've got all of those things that are in the current digital governance. So we're just reviewing that. So Seb's doing that piece of work. I think it'd be good to make sure that we link in so that we can develop something that feeds into this and supports it, rather than kind of going off in parallel.
So Ellie, I've got lots of hands going up, and so people obviously want to contribute. So I, rather than coming to you on every question, if you think you can come back in very quickly on them, then do so. Otherwise, I'd propose we get the questions out there and then we try and thrash them out as a group, because whilst you've presented it, I don't think they're for you to answer. I think they're for us as a board to answer in the main. So I'll run through with questions that are coming up from the hands raised, and then perhaps if you start to jot some of them down, I'll come back to you. Dominic.
Thanks, Jeff. Speaking as a practitioner, and I think I would echo the views of other practitioners, and I'll use the Mental Health, LD and Autism Steering Group as an example, because that's the area in which I'm mainly a practitioner. Decision making remains a black box to us. And that's not anyone's fault. And I'm not saying anything I haven't said to Ellie. I think her approach as outlined here, not her approach, but the approach as outlined here by her, is really helpful in beginning to unpack some of that. But we probably are going to need to get into some specifics. There are a number of decisions I can think of that either have been made or haven't been made, or I would like to get made, that it remains unclear what the decision-making process was or is. And therefore, we might need to almost codify those by saying this type of decision, this person or group of people have the power to say yes, and this person or people have the power to say no, and actually get into that level of detail and then run some test cases through it. Otherwise, the usual thing is, okay, I've got this thing I want to do. I'm bringing it to you because I think that you're probably the place where we should go, but I don't know what to do next. And we find ourselves scratching our heads thinking we don't know what to do next either.
Dominic, I think that's really helpful. And I think with decision making comes accountability as well. So we can't have people making the decisions if we're not clear on who's been able to account for them, which is always one when we fall over on. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. John?
Thanks, Jeff. And I think I'd echo what Dominic has said. Clearly, he's going to have to live with the implications of this. I've got three sort of broad areas that I just kind of wanted to comment on. First, really, was around kind of the structure and process. And I'm well aware, Ellie, of how big and complex a piece of work this has been. So I just want to say, well done to you for getting us to to this point, to be able to have this conversation. And having participated in one of the workshops, it's been a really collaborative, democratic, and open process. I think I was amazed at the breadth of representation that was there, and I think that was excellent. I think all partners really have had a chance to shape and to input this. And I also really like to see the thought that's gone into the underpinning, the structures that are going to that are either already in place or are going to get to be put into place. You can see how we're going to move fairly rapidly from concept into delivery. The thing that really runs through this for me is it's around culture, and we've been talking about consensus and partnership working sort of all morning, and particularly as a result of what Jeff and Shane had to say earlier. And I think the thing that's really coming through here for me is the kind of the maturity approach of approach. I think it reflects where we are and how we want to do things around here, and I think it strikes the right kind of balance between trusting the judgments, particularly of the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Nursing Officer around clinical matters, and having the right structures in place in our committees to be able to challenge and assure ourselves. And I think also kind of reflecting our self-belief and our self-confidence around what we feel is right for the population that we serve. And I think kind of, I know they're here for comment, but I think that the general direction in terms of the risk appetite, I think that they are very much in the right ballpark, and I think they either reflect that self-belief or they reflect where we need to do things differently. And I would kind of cite as a case in point finance, because I know we have worked really hard on VFM, and it's been really helpful and really positive, but it isn't necessarily affecting the step change. So I think that challenge to be able to do things a little different is really helpful. The final point I would want to make that really is around pace. And while I recognise the concerns that the local authority chief execs have made, and that that we're going to be able to hopefully address that, the internal auditors have flagged that for the right reasons we are some way behind where others are. And I would emphasise for the right reasons, and I think we're seeing the fruits of the work that has gone in that's put us in a really good place. But my plea really would be, I'm very pleased we're having this conversation now, that we haven't pushed it back to September. I think it's really important that we get some principles agreed, and that we can really start moving on this and start to see some progress. So I just really endorse what we have here, and a big thank you to Ellie. I think it's a terrific piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Lisa?
Thanks. And mine isn't a question, it's more to support what Ellie's presented, which is, if I just think about where we're going with the healthcare improvement groups, we are running those task and finish groups to be really clear about what the feeder groups, as Ellie calls the child groups, are for both mental health, learning disability and autism, but also in children, to be really clear that we've got those lines and clear accountability and clear points of escalation through. But the other bit of work that we're doing that I don't think we've done before completely as a system is we're being really clear about what our priorities are in each group. So within children, we'll be running a workshop next month to say, when we look at the strategy, we look at our transformation priorities, and we look at our operational performance, what are the programme of priorities for our work, for the work programme for children? So that's what the healthcare improvement groups will be able to own, and we'll do the same for mental health and learning disability and autism to really land that as part of our programme of work. So we're really clear, so we'll be able to say in terms of that reporting. So it's not just about decision making, it's also about giving us that totality around that work programme, and in that sense taking those decisions around that priorities, but as a collective across the system.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a really helpful explanation. Colin?
Thanks. I can't resist also paying tribute to Ellie and others' work to get us to where this is, and I know that there's a great appetite in the system to understand and think more about how, for example, HCIGs work and how they all link into the wider system. So it's great that we're having this conversation. There were two quick points I wanted to raise. One was around capacity. So common refrain in our previous operating environment was we have too many meetings in BNSSG, too many groups. So, you know, there's sort of overload of groups and meetings, and I think there is a danger that for good reason that we start to just build all that back up again, and we end up where we started. So, as colleagues will know, the strategy talks a lot about the need for prioritisation and being really clear about what we do first, and that will of course be compounded by the fact that for example, within the ICB organisation, the 30% reduction in cost envelope will limit the ability to service and support and coordinate some of this work simultaneously. And the second point was just around accountability and monitoring of delivery, I suppose, the benefits realisation piece, because if the HSIGs are to deliver, we need to agree what they are charged with delivering, what outcomes and changes, for example, within the BNSSG outcome frameworks and the 4 ICS aims, what is the responsibility to deliver against those metrics, and how do we monitor those? So I think building that in at the front end will be helpful to enable us to track that progress and see where value is being added.
Okay, thanks Colin. Matt?
Thank you, and thank you, Ellie, for all the work on this. It's hard, but the honest stuff that we need to do as a system, I totally agree with that. I guess just in terms of local authority perspective, a bit of what Hugh's just pasted in the comments there. I guess it's just recognising local authorities, we do have particular challenges around governance because we have constitutions and we have democratic accountability. So there are some restrictions on what officers can and can't agree to based on that democratic process. So that's a layer of complexity. It doesn't mean we can't work through it, but I guess that's why our chief execs are saying, can we have a bit more time on this? And not to be difficult, but just we're going to have to manage that well, and particularly take our elected members with us on that process. I guess there's a couple of other bits. One bit would be, it'd be really nice to see, and this might come out of tomorrow's meeting, about where the ICP board sit in this as well, because as part of overall governance, they are a key bit. You know, they are the wide partnership that set the strategy. And I know we're concentrating on delivery here, but there needs to be some interplay between the two bits of the system there, so that they can take that leadership role in bringing their organisations and their communities alongside to try and make these changes happen. And then a couple of other points just about, there's some reference within the document about citizen involvement and consultation and public involvement. I guess there's also a challenge to us about, we need to do things as organisations, as people responsible with, you know, the roles that we have, but how do we create a decision-making framework that has an element of public understanding and scrutiny in it? That would be a really good place to get to, where it's not just us in rooms, but how do we use a touchstone, various processes to challenge us? Does it actually connect with what communities value in terms of the types of changes that they want to see? And that might be something we could explore in the next stage. And then just a final minor point in the sort of assessment, it talks about reducing inequalities and saying, you know, if we don't do something quickly, then there's a risk of them widening. I suppose it's just a point that we've had lots of examples of decisions being made that inadvertently widened inequalities. So we do something because we think it's the right thing to do, but we don't actually assess the true impact on the population. So we need to get that balance right, and not in a non-deliberate way make a problem worse. But you know, so there's just a couple of points which I hope are helpful. Thanks.
Matt, I think that's useful, and Hugh's comments as well. I mean, just sitting here, you know, I'm thinking about what delegated authority do chief execs and exec team in local authorities have to make decisions, number one. And then number two, if we've agreed a strategy in our integrated care partnership, which is chaired by our health and wellbeing board chairs, then what part of that then can't we instigate into the ICB around delivery without having to go back through cabinet within local authorities? And I know it's complex, and I lived with it, and a wife who was a director general in DCLG, so I do understand it. But I just think if it's used as a blockage for us to be able to make decisions as we go forward, then I think we need to try and unpack them. And I think one of the ways might be is, I don't know whether this is a seminar or whether it's a conversation here at board, about us as a board understanding the decision making and governance within local government, because I think we come and talk about that, but you know, I don't think most people really understand how that works, because I don't think anyone that comes here from local government is deliberately not doing things, but has to work within a system that's been there since medieval times. So Anne, do you want to come in on that? You're on mute, Anne.
Sorry, I'm so obedient at following the initial instruction, then I forget. I think it would be really helpful to bring together people from this board with local government officers, just to go through some of the details, perhaps with a couple of examples. And I think although lots of people know that we've had a change of administration, for example, in South Gloucestershire, it's important to understand what that actually means in terms of our work programme at the moment, for example, and how we're having to change direction or consider changing direction in terms of officers' programmes. We are taking the strategy to Cabinet on Monday of next week. We have got it there as quickly as we can. And the important thing is that we're not taking it cold as well. We have done lots of briefings along the way. But I do think your concept of a further detailed meeting would be a helpful one, Jeff. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Ellen.
Yeah, thanks, and really good points there, Matt and Anne. So Ellie, can I first of all just applaud the thinking and the planning that's gone into this? So it's a brilliant piece of work. Saying that, I do wonder, and I'm slightly concerned that we're slightly over ambitious with the structure that we've put in place, and my concern comes from probably sometimes speed of decision making. So I know we need to be robust in our decision making, but I am also concerned about the speed of that. On page 67, you discuss limitations. You talk about recognising that the frameworks are complex, and it requires a significant investment from ICS partners. And also that the framework lands at a time when we are reducing ourselves by around about 30%. So I've got a question for partners around the table, and I'd be really interested in some of their feedback, is whether not fully understand, but fully signed on to this framework and understand what that means in terms of commitment from yourselves as well as your teams. So that would be my first question to partners. And secondly, for you, Ellie, you've asked us for quite a number of approvals today. You know, are there a number, one or two, that are really crucial in order for this work to move on, so that we can actually prioritise sort of some of our thinking into that? Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. That's really helpful. And when I sum up at the end, I'll come back to that point about prioritising those actions. I think if that challenge that Ellen's just put in, if those around the table want to raise their hand and come back in and respond to that, that would be quite helpful as well. So as we go through the discussion, I'll bring those back in. So thanks, Ellen. Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. Completely the same point as Ellen around the limitations, and I had written down, be interesting to know what chief executives around the table are thinking, and then I've seen Maria and Julie come in, so I don't want to repeat what Ellen said. Ellie, I think it is a great piece of work. You've brought things together which in other circumstances would be big items on their own, and you've brought them all in together to make sense. So I completely note that. Whatever principles we agree, and where we land on things like risk appetite or decision making, something has to convert into an easy read plan on a page for somebody who isn't around this table, who hasn't been to this workshop that you've led, which I've been to make sense to people. And I know that's the next bit, it's the implementation bit, but the worry is, and I'm sure it won't be because you're on it, and I know Shane's on it and Sarah's on it, but we have a really great set of principles, but they don't work in practice. Yeah. So if we can't explain on a page X, Y, and Z, then we probably need to go back again. So I know this is complex for us, and it's 36 pages, and I get that, but that's the bit I think, and I think using some scenarios, which I think colleagues already suggested, would be really helpful in that case. But a plan on a page, for want of a better phrase, I think would really help.
Thanks, Alison. Maria.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the willingness to be transparent about decision making. this feels quite complicated, and would absolutely get the point that, you know, if it's going to work, it needs to be fairly simple and easily understood. Otherwise, people will find ways around it and not engage. Obviously, the healthcare improvement groups are at a very early stage. The acute ones haven't even met yet or come together. So, you know, I'm absolutely willing to try, and I do think some of this will be in the testing and seeing and iterating, etc., and we may be able to pull out some steps. I suppose that, you know, some of the risks lie in the interface. So an acute healthcare improvement group will interface with all sorts of other areas. So I'm just wondering how we sufficiently flesh out our reach into primary care, into other partners, and whether risks around inequalities and you know, crossing boundaries can be picked up through these procedures. I would also like to say, if we do this, can it be instead of something else? You know, are there groups we could disband or take away to allow us to fully engage with this? Because I think with you know, calls on people's time at the moment, anything that adds complicated extra layers, even though, you know, in the long term it may be beneficial and we don't have to redo work, may be a bit of a hard sell at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. That's helpful. Jaya?
Just two observations, really. One, in that if we're going to be interfacing with our local authorities, we've also got to be resilient to governance changes. So obviously with Bristol going from mayor to a committee system, we've had a change of governance in South Gloss. Those sorts of things, I guess we need to account for that and have a better understanding, because these things will flip and flop all over the place in years to come. So just to highlight that. And the other one, I guess, is so Ali, firstly, amazing piece of work. It's really thorough, really rigorous, and I think once we get to a point of a simpler expression of what this is, it'll be much better. I think it's really about whether or not there has been an assessment of a likely time to decision making, as in, like, because there are so many layers, has there been a walkthrough of the time it takes to get from one point to another? Because I suspect that the higher the risk, the longer we'll end up taking, but also there's a risk in not jumping quicker. So I get this is complex and risk is not my bag. I mean, in terms of articulating it in such a thorough and quantitative way, but yeah, it's the time we need to make some of these decisions in these cases that will probably sell it or not sell it.
Thanks, Jaya. Ellie, hopefully you captioned all of these. Julie.
Yeah, just 2 points then. I think one, following on from Maria's point, I think that bit about the connections is really important. And I just looking at it, having all of those operational delivery groups, where do those connections get made? Because they won't get made at chief exec level. That's, you know, we won't be enough in the details. So I do worry that potentially we might go into silos, but we can talk about that. I think the other thing is, I wanted to pick up John's point, I think, about culture, which is so important. And I suppose in my head and the thinking we've been doing, it's that notion between decision making and decision taking. All of us know what our responsibilities and accountabilities are for taking decisions. Very rarely, in my experience, there are very few things, if I look in our own governance, where there are groups that actually have the decision making power. Usually it's the power of the people who are in those groups. And I think if we were a bit more transparent about that and basically said, Shane, it's your decision to make, but you need to demonstrate you've taken account of all these views. We constantly keep bringing it back to everybody. And I think sometimes that agility that we talk about, we need to have the discussion so we understand the impact, and then we need to be clear who actually then is going to make the decision. And hopefully, in the spirit of openness and trust, they will demonstrate that they've understood, taken account of the impact, and why then ultimately we made the decision we did as individuals or as individual organisations.
I think it's a good point.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Ruth?
Thanks. Just in terms of how well populated it is from our perspective, colleagues from OneCare and the ICB primary care development team had an away day on Wednesday, and Ellie kindly came along. We talked through this in some detail. It is complicated. We actually went through a couple of worked examples, which was helpful. So I think potentially, I mean, it is an amazing piece of work. So thank you, Ellie, and thank you for the time that you've devoted to individual teams as part of that. I think it will have to continue to develop as we work things out. I do share Maria's concerns about the interfaces, because when we're talking about the ICS strategy, and one of the key priorities in that is cardiovascular disease, which doesn't neatly sit within an HCIG, and so decision making when it comes to clinical pathways, I think, is less clear. And I think that would be helpful for us to iron out how that might work. I think the role of the professional executive was mentioned, and that might well be a key part of it. But I think that is just worth a little bit more exploring.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Lisa.
Thanks, Chair. So I think I'm trying to help answer in terms of the interface between the healthcare improvement groups, and there is no right answer between the division between the healthcare improvement groups. So the way the oversight groups are structured is to make sure that they are the pathway groups. So, for example, there will be an urgent care oversight group, which will in effect have to report into 4 of the health and care improvement groups. But part of that is about giving us that interface and giving that assurance back that those groups are working through, to make sure we've got that clarity and that pathway link, because we are a system, and our population will move through all different parts of our system. So it is the easiest way for us to then make sure we link that back into the health and care improvement groups as we work through it. And that's the piece of work that we're doing in terms of testing, just wanting to reassure people in terms of we are working through those oversight groups, which ones need to remain. Because at the moment they're called all sorts of different things, like programme board, steering groups, working through which ones need to remain and which ones do we stand down, and how do we then minimise the number of meetings that people are attending, but they're clear, embedded in our governance, taking it forward. So it is that piece of work that we're doing around those feeder groups, as Ellie describes them, in terms of making sure that we have landed them and brought them through.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Sarah?
I just wanted to reflect on what a helpful conversation this bit has been, and I'm really pleased to have had as much feedback, and it's a real testament to Ellie for getting all of this set out so that we can all see it, because we are a big and complex system, and so it is challenging, and no matter which way you cut it, there are challenges. I think the other bit I just wanted to reflect on, and one of the things that, this is a massive paper already, but there is also the link together with the sort of annual planning process that we need to think about, because when we're talking about decision making, I think we can be better at being more planned about it as well, so that we're not seeing this as reactive decisions. This is about us following a sort of clear decision making process as we go through an annual planning round, whether that's refreshing our longer term plans, our strategies, but also our operational planning. So I think one of the things that I'm planning to bring back to the board in September is that annual planning process, so that we can see how this structure is really supporting that annual planning process, so we can become more strategic in our approach and better at looking forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Steve?
Thanks, and I echo the tremendous piece of work here. And I guess getting my head around it, I was looking for some worked examples. I was trying to work through what would happen. So what are the statutory responsibilities, the must-dos, and then what could we be maybe a little bit more loose around in terms of which committees are going to be looking at stuff? Seems to me that we spend quite a lot of time repeating as we go up the system. So if we can get clarity, real clarity and agreement around what needs to go where and why, and what's the purpose of that, then we might save ourselves some time. And then providing we've got a good mechanism by which we can audit trail that decision, if we ever needed to, then it may be that we find we don't need some of the things that we've currently got in play. So we've said it before, I think, with other contributions, but there's something about doing the hard check now with some worked examples, scenario it and see where it goes.
Thanks, Steve. Ellie, I'm going to bring you back in a second, but you know, sometimes we sit here and think command and control is convenient and effective. Having come from that world, it is on certain things, but it's not in running an organization, and certainly not in running a system, because what we miss there is the complexity. We miss the different agendas, and actually we often in command and control come up with the wrong decisions because they're isolated. So it is going to take us longer to make decisions, but they have to be consensual, and they have to be collaborative, and they have to be cognizant of the way all our organizations work. And that's system decision making rather than organizational decision making. I know I'm stating what we know there, but you only listen to this conversation, we get hugely frustrated that we're not acting quickly enough, but actually we do have to work within a system. So it'll be good that Shane has that conversation next week on Tuesday, but it would also be good, Ellie, to look at those, that section 7 and those sort of 10 decisions. I think it's 10, there may be slightly more, there's 13, and work out what are the things that from the conversation we've had today, we think we might be able to decide on, and what are the things that probably need to be fleshed out a little bit more. So Ellie, just some reflections on what you've heard back, having put a huge amount of work into this.
No, thank you, and really helpful feedback. I will come back on a few points just because I think if I can, just like my interpretation of your questions and how I've sort of tried to wrangle this paper into some sort of shape. So there was Debs, I think, raised the point, I mean, about these kind of cross-cutting enabling functions we have within the system, and digital is a fantastic example. And the current digital delivery board maybe being an oversight group. And what I think I would like to try and consider is oversight groups could still dock into the operating and decision-making framework by standing up working groups in service of the problem that might be trying to be solved, which benefits the health and care improvement groups and the structures that sit within it. So I think one thing I would challenge the health and care improvement groups in thinking about the how they drive the activity in the system is the problem statement. What is it we are trying to improve? And they then may come to the digital oversight group for advice, who then may bring together a series of partners into a working group, which is the task and furnish group. So that, I think what I'm trying to explain is that although they are presented linear at the moment, they will have this natural crossover, because the oversight groups may say, actually, we need some work commissioned for the system to help solve the problem that the health and care improvement groups are articulating, whether that's a shared care record or whatever it may well be. And then it may be that there is a kind of a joint commissioned work between health and care improvement groups, you know, again, taking that digital example, that it's probably an interface between the acute health and care improvement group and the community one. So there may be a working group stood up in service of both of them, because that's where it kind of sits. So that may not be the best example, but what I'm trying to sort of articulate is that I think that there can be some flexibility in terms of how we, in terms of what is operating an operating framework and the oversight framework, and that the kind of the bits where they join together is where we actually bring people together to drive activity and do the work which actually provides the improvement that we wanted to achieve. So that was one point. The capacity question, I think we've covered off. I think Lisa really helpfully covered off, is that we are looking at we're doing lots of mapping now, and hopefully it will be a reconciliation, and that it will fit and align to what resource where we land in the end. It will align to what we can resource, either as system partners together. The bit around culture, which I think John raised, I think docks in quite neatly, and I'll talk to Joe Hicks about this more, about the work that the ICB is going to be doing with Next, because there's a potential OD piece here, not just for the organisation that is the ICB, but into the how we work as system partners as well. And I think the two probably could complement each other quite well. They certainly do in theory, whether they do in practice, Joe, but I'd be really happy to pick that up with you in the next team. The ICP Development Day is tomorrow, and I think that will help considerably in kind of trying to identify the role of the ICP in the BNSSG system and how we can make sure that there is that clearer line of sight. But I was quite purposeful in this paper that I didn't want to second guess the outcome of that development day tomorrow, because I think it's, you know, there's a lot of partners coming together to help support that piece of work. But I think there is a next iteration that we could be a little bit more, we could describe that better. And in that vein, Alison, I think the plan on the page, I've already engaged with our comms team, because I recognise that this is not an accessible framework, and we really want to be able to, we want to be really clear. We want to be able to communicate and articulate the kind of how we do things around here to various audiences, whether that's our citizens, whether that's our staff, even just our sort of our senior leadership teams, if nothing else. So I've already started that conversation with our comms team, because I totally recognise that I fall into the trope of management speak, and we need to start anchoring this in the reality of what people can understand, and a plan on the page is definitely a good way forward for that. The time mapping piece, Jay, I thought was really, I think you'd raised that. I think that's a really interesting point, and no, not done yet. But I think going back to Steve's point of some live examples, we could maybe think about that just in terms of the regular meeting cadences that we know exist in the system, and kind of forecast that. Again, it might be slightly beyond my area of expertise, but I could definitely give it a go. But I think that's a really good point. And yeah, I think that mainly covers off most of the points that I think you would want a response on. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. Shane, can I come to you? Because I think this has proved the point that it was absolutely worth having the conversation here today rather than postponing it. It's been a really helpful conversation. I think probably what we've had as asking us for recommendations today, we should probably pause on, but not pause for too long. And I'm just wondering whether you've got a view on how we take this forward, because I think there needs to be a consensus in how we move forward, but we do need to have a decision-making framework that we rely on going forward. So I think time is an essence on it. But so just over to you, really, as to how you think the best way is to take it forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, when I look down, first of all, thank you for the conversation. It's been brilliant. And in a strange way, when you're in the ICB, embedded in the thinking of this, you really get into the detail. And it's lovely to pretty much be an observer to that conversation, to see as it was unfolding. So thank you very much. Jeff, the way I see in terms of the recommendations, and I appreciate we're approving them today, given the commitment we've given to speak with our local authority chief executives and actually do the part that Anne and others have said about trying to understand how it connects to local government decision making, and Hugh's comments were very helpful. But there's nothing I would see in the recommendations that, in principle, based on our conversation we've had today, in principle, what I've heard is that the recommendations are sound. We haven't said, can we formally approve them? But there's nothing in the conversation I've heard today that would say, actually, those recommendations aren't a sound way to move forward in principle. And therefore, with your permission, having the conversation with the chief executives next week, just to make sure that, from a chief executive perspective, everyone's in the same place. Is it a matter of following that conversation next Tuesday or Wednesday that the chief executives come back and say, yeah, actually, we would support these as a collective, but here's a little bit of extra work around local authorities you might want to do? Because when I look at the 13 recommendations, there's nothing in them that would say, from the conversation we've had today, I'm sorry, this whole risk and decision-making framework we should throw out, because quite the opposite. From the conversation, it sounds like it's the right direction. So with your permission, Chair, to have the conversation next week with the chief executives and very quickly come back to you, Chair, with I think this is right, and can we now, through virtually, through email or whatever, not waiting till September, to actually say, yeah, this is the right thing to do. Would you be content with that, Chair?
So that sounds a sensible way forward. Can I just check if there's anyone strongly opposed to that? Which is, this is not red lines. This is about principles. But then Shane goes away and works through a bit more of the detail on it. Ellen?
Yeah, I think I'm just slightly nervous about the complexity, and I think Maria and Alison both sort of probably had the same sort of thought process there. So I would just want to be confident that a real open and honest conversation is had, because as I said, the plan is brilliant. If it's not deliverable, then it's not the right plan. So that's my only concern.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So Anna, Matt.
Just a quick comment on the process being proposed, Chair. I think that the only concern I would have about email sign-off is what accompanies that sign-off, because there is something about the content of those discussions that it might be important for other people to hear as contextual to the conversations we've already had this afternoon. So how could those be shared in addition to any actions that were agreed?
I think that's a fair point. Otherwise, we could be left-hand and right-hand in conversations. That's a point well made, I think. Matt?
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point to Anne, and I suppose it's just a bit of caution about the absolutely to have the conversation next week, but I guess there is still that process of going back through the elected member structure, and that might add another bit of time to it. And I'm just sort of thinking from the point of view of the organisation, we will have to get some citing and assurance through that process as well. So start the conversation next week, but it might take a bit longer, is my honest appraisal of some of that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And we want to bring everybody with us as best as we possibly can, don't we? Because otherwise we build a structure that isn't going to work. So Shane, I think rather than sign off agreement in principle, I think I'm not hearing any huge dissenting voices to what's been presented in the paper. There's been a really good conversation. It's unfortunate today that the three chief execs and local government aren't here. However, I don't think the discussion would have been any different anyway. I think we've had a similar sort of position, but we do need to agree a way forward. And it's what both of us started with at the start of the day, which is over the next year, for us to make some bold strategic decisions about how we're going to improve health and social care. We can't dance around the edges. So I think what I'm hearing is you need to go away and have that conversation and then think how that gets reported back here for a board agreement sign off or not, as the case may be. Ellie?
Thank you. And well, it was just also, I'm not sure the point was really well emphasised, but what we can do is in the background with the health and care improvement groups, Lisa already alluded to this, is we can actually start to think, start presenting what the future could look like, which might give partners more assurance around that resource impact to each other. So that at the moment, everything in here is illustrative. We haven't done that kind of, the health and care improvement groups haven't had the time yet to really do that hard look into what they think of the structures that would support them. So if we were to do that kind of a firmer proposal of what it could look like, that might give some comfort while you're having those discussions about the principles as well.
Okay, I mean, what I was suggesting, we leave this in Shane's hands to take forward, recognising that there's a sense of urgency around it, but also reflecting what Anne, Hugh and Matt have said, which is we need to be sensitive to partners around the table if we're going to make something that's sustainable and works. So, Shane, are you happy with that? Okay. Can I move us on from the conversation? So, Ellie, you're welcome to stay. A big thank you for the effort in this. I think we're really going to miss you when you do leave us. It's a very thorough paper, and to everyone who's worked on it, and it is like, wading through treacle, isn't it? Because it is so difficult to try and get consensus. But if we reach that line, this is going to be brilliant. So thank you and well done. We've now got a session on disability and autism. I'm going to pass to Rosie in a second. We've got a number of people who joined us as different contributors to this section. Once we finish this section, then we'll take a short break. I think the second half of the agenda should be quicker than anticipated. I don't think it'll be quite as long as we've planned, but we'll wait and see. But this is quite an important part for us. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that will come in here now in the leader reviews, the feedback to us as a board and the way that we deal with a lot of these issues is going to be really important. And I'll pass to Rosie now, but I think this part of our agenda gives us a chance to reflect and look back really at how we've performed in health and social care and how we will in the future. So, Rosie.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to colleagues who've joined me this afternoon. So I'm really pleased to be able to bring to board our 4th Leader Annual Report, and we thought to make it come to life for you all, we would actually do it in 3 parts. So we have colleagues from Sirona and MBT here who are going to do a presentation for us on the improvement activity they have undertaken over the last few years, in fact, which really works on the themes we learn out of our leader reviews. And then Leslie will take you through a few key points from the Leader Annual Report and the specifics of that. And then I'm going to conclude with some feedback from a national assurance review we've had undertaken by NHS England in our response to the 2nd independent review into Oliver McGowan's Leader. So we'll start off with the improvement activity and then we'll take you through the assurance pieces. So Michelle, you're very welcome, along with Gifty and Steve and Mary and Leslie. And Michelle, I think you're going to take the floor for us to start with, aren't you? So you're very welcome. And would you like to introduce yourself to colleagues on the screen? Thank you for coming to such a big group as well.
Okay, no problem. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm one of the, I am the lead learning disability and autism nurse here at Southmead Hospital, employed through Sirona. And I'm just going to go through some slides to show you the improvements we've been making over the last few years. So bear with me 1 second.
Well, Michelle, I'll cover for Michelle while she's getting that loaded. We've also got Steve Hams here, who's the Chief Nurse from MBT, Mary Lewis, who's the Chief Nurse from Sirona, and Leslie Lapine, who's been leading our leader activity, and Gifty Markey, also from MBT, so they're all very welcome. Back over to you, Michelle.
But can I ask you can see the presentation? Sorry,
I think they're moving quite fast.
That's fine, that's okay.
Cool.
It came in a different way than I thought it was going to, so
thank you so much.
No problem. So for us then, really the change started back in 2018. There were change in the leadership in MBT happened for us, and that was with Helen Blanchard and Sue Jones took the leadership on for learning disability and autism and trying to make some improvements. And since then, Steve Hams and Gifty have also been taking the lead. 2 of us within our team attended Florence Nightingale Foundation course to try and look at how to make some improvements within the service. And from that, we learned that we needed to have lots more discussions with the Director of Nursing within the hospital, look at pitching across the hospital all the different ideas that we had and to aim it at a higher level than we possibly have been doing previously. So we started developing some action plans and having some projects actually from that, and that was the Learning Disability Champions, which we now have in place in the hospitals, and reasonable adjustment boxes, which we'll go into further in the presentation. We started the Learning Disability and Autism Steering Group in 2019, which is now held quarterly and is attended by various leads within the hospital, of which Gifty now chairs. And we also have Sophie, who is Staff Engagement and Wellbeing Administrator, and she attends and gives us lots of ideas, actually, independently from us within our team, and how to move forward and make improvements within the hospital. We've held workshops face-to-face, both face-to-face and online, because obviously with COVID it got a bit more complicated. Again, with service leads and LD champions and the quality improvement team, we've worked really closely with them over the years as well to try and look at what's working and what's not working and what the gaps are and how we can improve that. And through that, we developed Gantt charts and stuff to try and improve things. We met with the carers liaison teams for feedback and ideas as well. And we we then went and presented a business plan. So to what was BNSSG governors at the time, and we completed various metrics and 12 different patient stories to try and give it a bit of life of how the learning disability and autism team makes a difference for the patients within the hospital. We showed the number of beds, days that were saved, and how we provide safer care for patients in the hospital. And we also work jointly with the business intelligence team here at MBT and Sirona for offering those reports to try and show increase the service. From that, we also decided that it would be safer to provide a 7-day-a-week service, which meant we needed more nurses to provide that. And we also lowered the eligibility to capture more patients. Historically, we only used to support people who were eligible for the community learning disability teams, but we've now lowered that to anyone who has a diagnosis of learning disability within the area. And then the pandemic happened, and so everything had to move really fast, and we had to make lots of changes. Obviously, we know from LEADER and stuff, people with learning disability are affected with respiratory problems 41% more than the general population, and yeah, and they died with respiratory problems. And that also we had the issue of carers not being allowed to come into the hospital. So where we were at 2 whole-time equivalents in the hospital, we increased this to 4 almost overnight. I think it was within about 3 weeks. The business plan that was being planned for the longer term came into fruition, and we were 4 whole-time equivalents, and we increased our service to 7 days a week. We provide 8 till 6 Monday to Friday, and at weekends 8 till 4. And then we also did lower our eligibility for anyone with a learning disability diagnosis, but also to include people with autism only as well. So during COVID, we had a lot more presence down in A&E. So we were attending the morning board rounds for handover. Allocated team member was supporting A&E throughout the admissions. We were checking all our care plans and making sure that people had hospital passports and information from EMIS, and also making sure there were the right conversations happening for MCA and best interest decisions, and making sure that the clinical frailty score wasn't used against our patient group. We offered liaison with families, and we used the iPads as well to communicate with families throughout that time. So we started getting a lot more presence. And you can't miss us anymore. We are now a very bright yellow branding throughout the hospital. And this, to be fair, it was incidental. We initially brought this in so that we could be recognised out of scrubs, because we were obviously all wearing masks, and we wanted to be seen as different within the hospital. But actually, we've kept it because it's provided us with an identity for both patients and for staff. They can recognise us. We can hand over to each other different patients, and it just provides us with a lot more visibility throughout the hospital. There are now 5 of us, so there's 5 full-time nurses, and we support anyone over the age of 16 on the Learning Disability Register who access MBT services. Our service is also replicated over in the BRI and Western also, which I'll go into later. And we've made the referral as simple as possible by phone, Careflow, email, or face-to-face. People can just grab us in the corridor. We don't expect to have a nice referral or anything, because we feel like that's a barrier to people referring to us. Oh, sorry. And then during COVID, Careflow Connect came into place, and that was amazing for us. That provided us with a lot more information for handovers. It gave us more visibility on the handover process as well. We were receiving direct referrals. We can add more tags to people. We can add learning disability, enhanced care, hospital passports, doles, eating and drinking guidelines, and we can write our recommendations onto Careflow as well. So anyone involved in that patient can see our recommendations. Here's an example of the pages that we can put and the different information that we write onto the services. So we can say they have the hospital passport, they've got epilepsy and will need a vagal nerve stimulator, and make sure that they go into a shared bay, maybe they're nil by mouth, etc. So we've got much more presence on the handover process for people now to see the recommendations made. Again, allergies are pointed out there as well. We now have a system called alert subscriptions as well. So it's from the moment that someone gets admitted into hospital, we get a information sent to us. You can see just here on the left hand side, it will just say that such and such has been admitted, and so then we can check and see what the handover is and see if there's any problems, and we directly triage those patients and find out if there's any issues or if they've got carers with them or if they're on their own, and we'll offer that support. We now have that in place for people with autism as well, and their alert. At the moment, we're still building the numbers of patients who have autism alerts within the hospital, and we're working with the Bristol Autism Service and various other autism services in the area to try and promote more people sending us their passports. You can see also that we now have much more visibility of allergies and also where whether the person has a learning disability, what their additional needs are, if they're a wheelchair user, etc. So it's much more visible on the system. This is what we do. So this is our bread and butter really, and what we do in the hospital. So we're here to increase awareness of people with learning disabilities and autism. We'll offer guidance, help plan and attend appointments as necessary. We'll deliver training. We offer specialist support to clinical wards and the areas. We provide resources, including hospital passports, and we'll check if reasonable adjustments are needed, and support the use of accessible information. We spend a lot of time preparing information for people and videos and stuff for people to help them understand their procedures. We are employed by the Adult Learning Disability Health Service in Sirona, which is unusual to be employed separately from the hospital, but we feel that actually this adds, it provides independence to ensure that we're advocating for the patients, but it also works really well. So we've got really close working relationships with the CLDT, so we can access all their notes and their care plans. We can see or any updates across the hospital admissions, and the CLDTs can see those notes as well of what's been going on, and it means we remain up to date with what the services are happening within the community and what support is available. All three hospital services now, liaison teams, are now managed by Sirona, and we all have the same manager. And so it's providing us with a better opportunity to work closer together and work in more similar ways. So it's less of a postcode lottery of which hospital you're working in, because we're all aiming for the same roles, and we're developing SOPs and joint hospital passports together so that we're sharing lots of information. And that triage management process with the hospital and Sirona means that we're all bringing a broader knowledge and understanding together. So it's really working well. We each Monday will send a list of any patient that's been in the hospital, whether that's outpatients or inpatients, and send it to the CLDTs to make them aware of the admissions. And then if there's any additional information that they need to know, they can come back to us, and that it means that they're always aware. And if there's repeated admissions, we get questioned on that as well. So it gives that further information and to the teams. As we said earlier, we've recruited learning disability champions across the hospital. We now have 126 champions across the trust here in MBT. We were about that number prior to COVID, and then obviously that dropped because there was a lot of movement around the hospital and people changing or leaving. We've now been doing some more promotion, and we've got more champions, and actually we get emails saying that people would like to be champions. For that, we're asking them to advocate for people with learning disabilities and in their own areas, and to attend meetings and to stay up to date and to share information with their teams, and to basically just put their hand up and say, what about someone with learning disability and autism in their area? We provide them with 3 monthly training sessions. We had one yesterday actually, and we also have special folders for them to access more information, and they've got a private Facebook page where they can share information with us and we can share with them. And we also send a newsletter to them with any up-to-date information or changes. Here's an example of one of the newsletters that we'll send out to them, and we'll just make sure that they get regular information, and they're sent out quarterly. Here's another project that we did was the reasonable adjustment resource box. So there's one of these yellow boxes in every clinical area in the hospital now. It's got about 30 documents in there of how to support people with learning disabilities and autism, thinking about if someone is complex behaviour, what pathway they need to follow, what they need to consider, etc. And we've also made it electronic on the intranet, so that if people haven't got access to the box, they can find it there and they can print off the specific documents that they'll require also. Autism training, obviously for us, we are learning disability nurses, and we added that in for as part of our role throughout COVID. So as part of that, we've been getting additional training. We've got we had some tailored training from the Bristol Autism Service at the start of COVID, and we did this across MBT, UHBW, sorry, and the mental health liaison team and ED staff. We've also had specialist training with the autism psychiatrist, because there's a lot of complexity between mental health and autism, and we've also had additional training for the ED staff as well, which was co-produced. We've developed a hospital passport for autistic people across all of the hospital trusts. We all work together with people with autism, and basically we've built this together, and we're all using the same document. And so people are sending us through these documents. We're uploading them onto the system to inform our practice. There's also the hospital user group for autistic people, of which people attend to try and improve services in the hospital, and these at the moment are run 3 monthly. Within the hospital, we use an initial assessment, again, a running theme with the yellow. We've print these out on yellow forms so that they're a lot more visible within the medical notes, just so that people can see what the recommendations are. And at the end, we'll make a whole list of reasonable adjustments that the person will require. Also, when we revisit the person on the wards, we also put a sticker within the notes so that it's more visible. They know that we've visited, and they can see what we've written there as well. And it gives us a framework for us to check what's in place. We've worked with, like we said earlier, the quality improvement team, and we've been improving processes going through to the Medi rooms and theatres. So actually now we have a very clear process of questions that we need to ask people before they're coming into theatre, and this is information that we share across the board with the Medi rooms, the theatre staff, the surgeons, the anaesthetists, etc. So everybody knows what they need to do in advance of someone coming into hospital. On our intranet, we've really worked hard to improve our intranet page, and in that we've got lots of easy read resources, and we've got we've been developing those over the years, and we've provided templates, and we've provided lessons to people so that they can build their own easy read within their services also. And they look a little bit like this, and we use photo symbols, and we'll tailor and adapt the easy read dependent on what the people will require. We've bought lots more sensory equipment with the help from Southmead Charity and the ICB, actually, in the last year or so. And you can see here, this is Lynn. Oh, it's not working. Usually it moves around. So this is a room in A&E, which what we've chosen is, instead of having specialist rooms with sensory lights and stuff, we have bags of sensory gear that we can take to any room to adapt it as required. We have magic table now projectors, which is really handy for physiotherapy, etc. And oh, sorry, I'm moving around. I apologise. And yeah, and so actually these projectors are fantastic for physio. They're really interactive. It's less functional in the sense of trying to make people to get up to go to the toilet. We're using it in a fun way. They can have football, they can be kicking leaves. We can do it on the bed, we can do it on the floor, we can do it on the ceiling. And we've got 5 of these now within the hospital which we're using. And the BRI and Western also have some of these magic table projectors recently been bought for them. We've had quality checkers come in, as you're aware, maybe that for the recent review that we had with David Harling, and they came in and did a full check of the hospital of what we how we're doing and what improvements we need to be making. And we also had the Bristol Autism Service provide an audit of our A&E service and a few other services in the hospital, and they fed back to us also with improvements. This is Olivia, and
We can see Olivia, but we can't hear her, Shelley.
Can't hear her.
You have to do something clever inside the Teams app to coordinate the but maybe we could send the link out to people afterwards. That'll be okay.
No problem. She's lush. She works with our team anyway now, and so I was just since February, Olivia has been working with our team as an expert by experience. So we've got a really clear work plan with her, and she's helping us improve our training. She's improving our hospital passports. At the moment, there's a project where they're looking at all the different hospital passports across the areas and trying to make it improvements to ours locally. And we're going to join that up between MBT and UHBW. She's helping us with our easy read and checking that, and helping us with the learning disability champions coming to those meetings also, and also helping us with a hospital user group in the future for people with learning disabilities. She was also very visible and around a lot for our Learning Disability Week in June. She, as you can see, she's involved in the training. In our training sessions now, we do 15 minutes in staff induction every 2 weeks. We are involved in, we're doing 2.5-hour training sessions in the acute setting. So this is separate to the Oliver McGowan training. We are doing it specifically for the acute setting. And every other week we are doing learning disability, and alternate weeks we're planning on doing autism, which is currently still being developed. We have learning disability, as we said, champion training, and we also are planning a one-day masterclass, which is going to be co-produced. And we do loads of tailored training for specific teams. So we'll offer tailored training to physiotherapy, radiotherapy, etc. And we'll work out what the needs are for those individual departments. We've had really nice feedback, as you'll see from the training. People think it's really interactive. We've tried not to do death by PowerPoint, so we're trying to do the whole scenario-based training, which is really helpful, I think. And for Learning Disability Week, which was a couple of weeks ago, we did a couple of training sessions. We had a stall in the atrium. There's a display board competition, and I think, yeah, we've got a real presence within the hospital, and I think there's a real zest within the hospital for people wanting to learn now and how to make improvements. And we've also, as you'll see, we've had the Misfits in. I think 3 times now, and they've been in different scenarios. They've done flash mobs on the ward, pre-COVID that was, and also they've done lots of different settings. So this is on the staff canteen outside, trying to teach people how to think about things differently, and it's been really informative and really helpful to have other people like the Misfits supporting us. But going forward, this is it. We're done. So training is our biggest, obviously, priority. Outpatients, how to improve alerts and referrals, and people who do not attend. We're looking at getting pagers within the waiting areas, so people don't need to stay in those areas. More sensory equipment, increasing the champions, maternity to review their care pathways, and also to work more closely with our UHBW colleagues. The Cancer 2-week waits, how to reduce the wait because of the Mental Capacity Act the process. It can delay the process, so we're trying to reduce that process as well. And then building hospital user groups for people with learning disabilities too. The behaviour support group in the hospital, we're part of that, and also looking at to do more joint work with the different services, the children's hospitals, the children's hospices, etc. And also to recruit some admin to support us with our roles. So yeah, that's where we're at now from our services.
Michelle, that was absolutely fabulous, and thank you. Such an amazing amount of work that's happening in such a focused way. If you just want to pop your slides down, I'm going to invite Leslie to take us through some of the stuff that's happening out of hospital around improving access and outcomes, and then we'll just take any questions that we have, if that's okay, and then I'll take us through the assurance side of the afternoon session.
Is that visible, Rosie?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Leslie.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of some of our leader work. Hopefully you've had a chance to read our annual report. But the most important part, I believe, of leader is learning from reviews. It's all very well doing a mortality review, but our focus should be on the living and taking those lessons into there. So last year we had 62 deaths. They go to a panel, and from this we pull out themes. And every project that I've done this year has been co-produced with people with learning disabilities or autistic people. Annual health checks, I'm not going to dwell on this a great deal, but our GPs have been fantastic partners. Back in 2021, it was 70%, and this year the target was exceeded, 82% health action plans. We've got the highest achievement in the Southwest. And, you know, I'm so grateful to our GPs who've been fantastic partners and put up with my badgering them about annual health checks. These are some of the things we did to involve service users, having a checklist, Zoom sessions. We, particularly last year, we paid learning disabled people to develop a health action plan, which was easy read, and it self-populates from EMIS. And we also commissioned learning disabled actors to make a video. If you haven't seen it, it's got a really catchy tune, but it's pretty amazing work to support our GPs, but they've done all the hard job. So some of the projects, what we pick out as a theme, for an example, is obesity. 33 of our 60 odd reviews last year had obesity as a factor. And we've worked with Square Food Foundation to do a fantastic cookery school with people with learning disabilities themselves, helping them think about food, the food they eat. Rosie and Shane have been along, and I hope they loved it. I'm pretty sure they did. And it just is really a professional cookery school that really teaches people about their bodies and food and what happens. One of the things that are our outcomes is we were key to reduce the risk factors of dying. Everyone changed their eating habits. It's amazing how simple it was. You know, red velvet cupcakes made with beetroot. Who knew those are amazing? All participants now cook at home. And it led into other things like come dine with me, inviting friends and family around for supper. This lady here in pink is Anne. She only ever ate ready meals for 10 years, and now she cooks fresh every day. Everyone lost weight, and we've just started, the third cohort started in April, and it's still an amazing session. The other piece of work we wanted to do was with Black and minority ethnic families, because we weren't seeing them coming forward for annual health checks or in mortality reviews. So the ICB funded this piece of work, and Autism Independence gathered the experience of having a learning disabled or autistic person in the family, and they worked with 42 families. Their findings were very much about the impact of autism on their everyday lives as a family, an astounding amount of racism still and racial stereotypes from healthcare providers and others about the experiences families have. So, you know, a lot of issues there. Lack of engagement from men, and some of the political context like Brexit really affected people in distressed families. So what we want to do from there is particularly work with men. They often disengage from the family where there's an autistic or learning disabled child. So we funded Autism Independence to do training with fathers, working with local imams and community leaders. And we're also in the process of funding care navigator roles for 2 years initially with families where first language isn't English, and those care navigators will come from minority ethnic communities, particularly Somali and Polish. Poo Matters, our Poo Matters is famous now, it's nationally famous. Constipation is still a huge factor in leader reviews. 39 reviews had constipation as a factor. So we've worked with North Somerset people first, and Serona Tracy Pouard, who's been amazing. And they just identified that people with learning disabilities were embarrassed to talk about poo, wouldn't talk with their GP. So it was about developing shared language. We started Zoom groups during COVID and delivered food packs. and then gradually that work's gone on with training for carers and providers in different services. And just recently, the gang attended the Learning Disability Nurse Conference with over 400 delegates, and you can see them there with David Harling, who was really keen for them to do that. Cancer screening, another area of work that we're developing. Top 4 causes of death for leader. It's often undiagnosed. People are often late stage cancers that are untreatable, and people with learning disabilities are not getting equal access to chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So we have secured funding for a permanent screening practitioner that will sit with Sirona solely for people with learning disabilities. And they will teach self-examination, build it into regular routines, do lots of training, etc. This is a boob tabard that you can wear, and there are single boobs, and we've got testicles and all sorts of stuff, got cervix models that caused a lot of laughter in the office, but really helpful models to teach people about self-examination and what happens. As Michelle mentioned, we did a great piece of work with a group of autistic people. Autistic people and learning disabled people are very different, often lumped together. Don't think they should be, but our group were amazing, and they developed an audit tool. We visited all the sites and did individual reports to each hospital. And here you can see Ben and Chrissy. We were shortlisted for the National Patient Engagement Awards, and we were robbed, frankly. We should have won, but we funded 25k to purchase reasonable adjustments recommended from these audits. We did some top tips for staff, which again the autistic people developed to encourage ED staff. They did training. We've also particularly supported the voices of people with learning disabilities and funded People First across BNSSG with 16 new groups: Speak Up Together groups, friendship cafes, green walking, men and women's wellness, and youth voices. And then finally, dysphagia. Choking is a big issue in leader reviews. 15% of people with learning disabilities have dysphagia, so we worked here on some top tips, and we've also funded some of the providers like Brandon and Milestones to do some work with people who have dysphagia, helping them understand their condition. So, and that is it. Sorry I rushed, but we're tight on time.
We rushed a bit because there's so much that's happened, and I think the really important point of us bringing these 2 presentations to you was to show you the point of leader, because the point of leader is to understand the experience of care in someone's last weeks of life, to understand the causative factors towards their death and why we have a disparity in mortality between the whole population and people with a learning disability, and then do something about it. And what was absolutely critical for me as your exec lead was to make sure you could see the so what bit and the so what we've done. So that's it. I don't know if Gifty or Steve or Mary have got anything to add, but I think particularly to thank partners in the system for working so closely together, because without that and the drive and the passion and a bit of money, none of this would have happened, and we need all of that to continue and sustain. So Steve, Mary, anything you'd like to add?
I think only one thing from me, Rosie, is just to acknowledge the collaboration between us and Sirona, and particularly the Michelle in the learning disability team. It truly shows the value of learning disability nursing. Michelle and her team are absolute inspiration to me, but also to many colleagues, to ensure that every patient gets touched by and seen by a learning disability nurse is such a huge commitment, but one that pays real dividends. And the feedback we get from patients and their families and their carers is really quite exceptional. And I think Michelle and the team are very modest, but actually when David Harling came to visit, he did say, and these were his words, they are gold standard. And I can absolutely recognise and acknowledge that. So I think just to acknowledge the collaboration with us and Sirona and Michelle and the team has been hugely important for our improvement journey, and will continue to be so. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you, Steve. Mary, anything?
Well, the only thing I'd add, obviously, Steve and I, we work really closely on this, and it's absolutely these nurses, and also how we've also extended this to the other hospitals now as well. And I think that sort of developing it and then spreading and the continual sort of learning that the whole team are doing. And it's a really good example of where it's like it's a service without walls. Probably everybody forgets who's employing who, and they work for the good of the people that they need to work with right across the community. And I think, you know, Michelle described it very, you know, just on one bullet point on the slide, but the sort of the flow between the in-hospital service, LD service, and the community and the support. It's kind of that fluid management from a nursing perspective, and all the other sort of multidisciplinary team and communities wrapped around these people and the people that need specific support. So yeah, just to add to that, but I think it's a team without walls that we try and manage, and I think it's a good example where we might spread for other areas because it works really well, doesn't it?
Thanks, colleagues. And Jeff, you know, I have one last piece of assurance to do, so if you're happy for me to move on to that.
Yeah, I think perhaps before you do, Rosie, just to say both to Michelle and Leslie, thank you for the inputs. I mean, I know I said it at the Quality Committee this week, but it's the passion, isn't it? You know, if that passion that you've got for the area you've been working with is translated across all of health and social care, we'd be moving mountains, wouldn't we? And I know we've got to do the structures and the processes and the governance and everything, but actually, both of you today have given us a really strong reminder about forget all of that. It's about caring. And you clearly do. And that's translated into the way you deliver the service and why you're described as a gold standard. So just a big thank you, really. I'm sure I echo the thoughts of this whole board in that. So, yeah, brilliant.
Thank you. And thank you to colleagues. And you're very welcome to stay on for this last piece. So board members will have in your packs another set of papers which relate to an independent review by the NHS England national team. And obviously we've invited our colleagues here to present what we're actually doing and the significant improvement that we've made to improve the outcomes of care for our citizens who are autistic or who have a learning disability. And board members will remember, mostly of you, that in October 2020, the independent review into Oliver McGowan's leader process phase 2 was published, and you have your papers in your pack about this. That review was commissioned by NHS England following unresolved concerns by Oliver's family about the investigations that had been undertaken previously. And the CCG was deeply sorry for the mistakes that it made during Oliver's original leader review and recognised that the systems and governance that were in place at that time were not good enough. As you can see from the presentation today, we've significantly improved our leader processes since then and our governance. Executive oversight has been strengthened and the operation of our leader process is robustly managed. Support for reviewers is significantly improved, and we have significant clinical check and challenge throughout the process. As you can see, our learning and leader journey brings us to a very, very different place from when that first review was completed. And then, as we said, such significant thanks to Sarona, MBT and other colleagues for engagement in that. In order to provide assurance that our system had made sufficient progress against that independent review, Claire Murdoch, who's the National Director for Mental Health for NHS England National Team, commissioned David Harling, who's the National Deputy Director for Learning Disability and Nursing from Ruth May's team, to undertake an independent assurance review of our system, which started in November 2021, has been slightly delayed by various things along the way, but concluded at the back end of last year. And that review took 2 parts. There was a significant desktop exercise where Leslie and I submitted over 200 separate documents to David, both for the second MAR into Oliver's death and the independent review into our leader processes. And that formed part of a desktop review that David undertook. That was then triangulated by system visits, by the independent quality checkers you've heard us talk about, and by the visits by the BAS team and our autistic people into our ED departments. And then David and colleagues came on site in October, November last year, wasn't it, Leslie? And met with us, did a series of focus groups, conversations with people using our system and conversations with clinicians, and heard all of that feedback, some of which you've heard today. You'll see in your papers we've now had a letter from NHS England and a report from David. And you'll see from David's letter that he's concluded that it's evident the BNSSG Integrated Care Board has actively implemented all of the recommendations from the independent review. The governance to support the delivery of the recommendations was found to be robust, and there was found to be effective monitoring in place to assure onward delivery of each of the recommendations. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to invite board both to sign off our annual report for this year, but also to accept the report from the NHS England national team and its oversight of our process. I'd like you to support the fact that we will continue our leader governance oversight through the Outcome, Quality and Performance Committee, and we will continue with our improvement work led by our provider network and with the support of Health and Care Improvement Group, to whom we will be coming for intermittent funding to make sure we can carry on the work that we've started. So thank you.
Thank you, Rosie, and I think you summed that up really well. I mean, I will open up to any observations or questions from board members in a moment. But, you know, I think it's important for me to say as the chair, it's awful when we get things wrong. And Oliver McGowan is a good example of that. But we do learn the lessons. We talked about this morning about us repeating things that we do. But there's a clear example here around leader about how you particularly have gripped it. And so thank you, but also the rest of the team in the response. And long may that continue, because actually there's nothing worse, is there, than us not learning the lessons from tragic circumstances. So well done. So can I just open it up to any observations or questions? And I've got Dominic, Ellen, and then Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. I suspect Rosie knows what I'm going to ask, because I forewarned her that I would. As she will know, it's a requirement upon all CQC regulated health providers. There's all of our staff are trained in the Oliver McGowan training. And in BNSSG, there's been a delay in the deployment of that training because it was being done centrally. And I just wanted to ask in public, as it were, where we are with that and how quickly we think we're going to be able to deploy that so that we can get all of our staff trained. We did actually have a must-do action from one of our CQC inspections noticing that, and our response was inadequate because, well, not inadequate, but our response was unsatisfactory because we weren't able to give a firm date.
Yeah. Thank you, Dominic. There were some technical hitches with the IT, which I believe are now ironed out, and people are undertaking the training now. So we're underway.
Thanks, Dominic. Ellen?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Rosie, and thanks, team, for a really good session there. We did discuss both the leader report and Oliver McGowan independent assurance review at Outcomes, Performance and Quality. Rosie, you've led a system-wide approach to this work, which is really commendable. So just wanted to put that on record. The risk in your report, however, suggests that without system sign-up, there's a risk that learning will not be embedded. So can I just ask you to provide assurance that the processes that you have in place going forward will continue to ensure this work is embedded and that the improvements that you've made will continue? So just from you, if I could.
Absolutely, Ellen. And so this is Leslie's last time with us, because Leslie's actually finishing with the ICB at the end of this month, and a lot of this has rested with her and me kind of driving this agenda forward. But for your assurance, we are placing or embedding the leader governance process inside the core ICB quality and safety team. And I have helped the team reorganise some work programmes to make sure that is embedded firmly inside our existing governance and infrastructure. So that will take care of the leader governance process. I will carry on being the executive lead for this, and I will carry on chairing our leader governance group. So we will maintain executive oversight, and I will report that through both to your committee, Ellen, but also to the Health and Care Improvement Group. So we've got a really clear line of sight through. The other elements, the significant co-production improvement work, well, the CLDT and the work that MBT and Sirona are doing is funded through recurrent funds. So over the last 3 years, we have sourced that is embedded, and that is staying. So the passion of people like Michelle is there, the team is secure and is recurrently funded. So that bit is absolutely secure. The bit that we'll need to work through the Health and Care Improvement Group and using SDF funds will be the new improvement activities. So these pieces that Leslie's shown you about, where we do a task and finish piece around improving, say, access to cancer screening, or developing new pieces of work, say, around developing advocacy skills with people with learning disability. We will need to make sure that we have a good process through to the Health and Care Improvement Group, and we resource through some of the SDF monies or through our public health inequalities money. But that will be a joint endeavour. That will be me coming to Dominic and Joe as our chairs of that group and making sure we keep this a priority.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks, Rosie. Alison?
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Rosie. I think when you came into post, you created the sort of leadership we really needed to have around this, to give confidence to the family, to Oliver's family, and to everyone else who uses the system. So I wanted to just recognise the leadership that you've done on this. It's been really great. It's a variation on Ellen's point, really, but clearly we have got loads of very committed, passionate people, and NBT, I think, are just pioneering in this space with Sarona. I think it's just brilliant. We have got a whole system though, so just Rosie, in terms of your confidence that we will be able to improve consistently across the whole of our patch, and keep going across all aspects. I don't know whether you've half answered it with Ellen's question, but is there anything that you need from us to support you in that respect, or as I say, just tell us your confidence on that.
So it will require us to stay energised, absolutely, and in the face of everything else, that can at times be an inevitable. But I had a good conversation with Steve and Mary about this last night, and I think we've got a bit of a plan up our sleeves to kind of make this a broader system piece and make sure we embed in wider teams. So I don't know if Steve or Mary want to come in, but that, again, as I said, that will require a little bit of funding. But I think there is an absolute understanding that we carry on. This is a really important piece of work for one of our most vulnerable parts of our community. So I think working with Steve and Mary will make sure this continues. But Steve, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just a couple of things. Firstly, we talk about Oliver a lot at NBT. His legacy and the work that his mum has done kind of continues on in the work that we do, and I've actually shared that with Paula. So we do talk about him a lot in terms of our improvement work. The other thing from me, from a nursing perspective, is we now have Gifty Markey, who's our associate chief nurse, leading on learning disability and autism and mental health. And of course, we've got the clinical strategy for our organisation, which signals very clearly our work around mental health, particularly, but within that, learning disability and autism. So it feels like the ingredients are right to continue this piece of work. And actually, it's been such a transformational journey. Actually, it can't stop now because it's going too quick and everybody's involved. So I don't foresee that being a longer term problem.
I think the other bit, Alison, just to close that off, is we have our provider network that covers primary care, some of our voluntary community sector providers, and all of our big NHS providers. I think I need to look at that with Steve and Mary and just make sure that's broad enough. But I think that will be our vehicle for addressing the issue you're raising about have we got the breadth of system working there. I think we've got the vehicle. It just might need a little bit of a refresh, which we'll look at.
Mary, did you want to come in on this point as well?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add really to what the other two are saying, is that the other bit I think, Alison, I was hearing is about, obviously it's probably some of this work is further advanced in NBT because that's kind of where we started, but just that assurance really, and I think again Michelle alluded to it in her presentation, that we can do rapid spread of the learning and what we already know works, obviously adapting it. So we are working really closely in those other two teams now that are jointly managed in both Western Hospital and all the hospitals on the BRI site, to sort of use that. So just to give that assurance as well. But and then Rosie's point about it needs to be spread further across all provider networks. What else further can we do? I think that's ongoing where we need to get to next, if that helps with that assurance.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Colin?
Thanks, Chair. My question was about the earlier bit of the item around the system improvement work. So I don't know if others wanted to continue the conversation about Leader and Oliver before I came in, or I'm happy to go now either way.
But far away, Colin. I know Sue and Leslie will want to come in, but it'd be probably quite good to give Leslie the last word, I think, as well. So.
All right, thank you. So just in terms of the great work that Michelle and Leslie and others were talking about, I've been really privileged to sit on a group that Shane set up for people with physical disabilities and sensory impairments in BNSSG, and colleagues may know that they're going to come and do a presentation to a seminar in the board later this year. And it just struck me listening to the presentations that there are a number of issues that are very redolent and are experienced by people with physical disabilities and sensory in the same way people with learning disabilities are. Now, I am not saying that the needs of those groups are entirely homogenous, but I just wonder if we're missing a trick in terms of some of the real progress we've made I hear in terms of supporting people with learning disabilities, where there's read across and some synergies that we could achieve in the way that assumptions are made, or our services will inevitably reflect societal views about disability more widely that are complex and are on a journey. So I just wondered what colleagues' thoughts may be about how we keep the specificity that we need, but also think about things that are common across disability as a whole, rather than separating out learning and physical disabilities.
Shane, did you want to come in on that?
It was my thinking was similar in terms of even the likes of alerts and flags and training and all the kind of stuff that you would like to apply to anybody with either a physical disability, sensory impairment, or a sensory disability. So I think it is a conversation I'd love to get into. I'm not too sure now on the back of today, but I think the logic of having a true commitment to a group of individuals really having an understanding of learning and training and development, and really using the whole idea of learning from their experience and changing processes. I mean, I think we should apply, and as I say, we will be bringing work later in the year on physical disability and sensory impairment, and to see where we can go with that. So I think there's a lot of alignment.
And can I just see if Michelle would like to come in on that particular item, Jeff?
I was just going to say, within the training that we do in MBT is very much that, in the sense of you apply it to this group of people, but you're using the same principles for anyone with additional needs, and to think about reasonable adjustments for all different types of groups, and how can I help you? What do you need, sort of thing. And I kind of think it's more that hidden disability agenda, isn't it, that needs to go out there, and the sensory needs and stuff. And yeah, it's across the board. And I think so long as we all support those principles, it can be discovered for lots of different groups of people.
Thanks, Michelle. Sue?
Just to echo everybody's comments there about the fantastic work and the leadership that goes behind it. I know how long it's taken to get to where you've got to, so thank you for your perseverance on this. My point was around workforce, and just I put it in the chat about what great advert this is for learning disability nurse training. Unfortunately, our numbers are dropping off nationally, and I really do think BNSSG need to optimise this as something that they should be pushing forward, whether it's through apprenticeships or whatever the workforce plan will be coming out with, to support you to do that. But you've got that framework that many don't have, that should really enable you to have the platform to become the leaders nationally for this. So I think maybe if we can catch up outside of this, Rosie, Steve, Mary, to talk about how we can take this forward, because I think it's shameful, with such great work going on within your system, that we don't have more people coming forward to want to do their nurse training for learning disabilities. So can we take that outside, please?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that, Sue. And I did talk to David Harling about that this week. And there's a fabulous model of training being proposed down in the peninsula that looks really interesting. So I will pick that with David, but really good to pick it up with you as well.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. Leslie?
I was just going to pick up on Dominic's point about the Oliver McGowan training. There's a new team that have been appointed just last week within the ICB, and there's a project manager for driving the training, who is Becky Benson, and she started recently. And there's a little team of 3 of them that will work with all of our providers to make sure the Oliver McGowan training is taken up, and we record our numbers. The other thing, I was going to be a little bit provocative in that the pan disability model hasn't worked for people with learning disabilities. So it's great, there is lots of learning for other disability groups, but people with learning disabilities always end up at the bottom of the pile. So it's really important that they have their own spaces for their voices to be heard, not interpreted by others. So I'm sorry I'm being a bit controversial, but that's my view. Worked in this for a long time. People need their own space and their voice to be heard.
Leslie, I don't think that is controversial. I think that's the same across all areas of equality, isn't it? We conveniently like to lump things in together, and actually we need to look at people independently and look at their needs. So I mean, I just think in summary from this session, Rosie, I think you've given us a a degree of confidence that you've got the reins on this and you'll keep it going. That there's nothing good about the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death, but and it would be little solace, I think, for the family. But what has come out of it is a galvanization of effort towards making things better, and yeah, that has to be a really good thing. So well done of difficult circumstances. Thank you, everybody. I think that's been quite a moving and a really informative session. It's just coming up to 2:45. Can I suggest we take 10 minutes, so back at 2 to 3. Big thank you to all of our contributors in that session. And then we've got a couple of other items, and I don't think they will take us that long to cover the rest of the ground, but I think people could probably benefit from a 10-minute leg stretch, if that's okay. Is there anything else anyone wants to cover on this section before we finish? No? Okay, see you all back at 2 to 3 then, if I can. Well done, Rosie.
Sorry, Jeff.
Well done.
Thank you. And thank you for making the time to hear it through properly, because I think the framing was critical.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
They're an amazing team, aren't they? They just, every time I see them, they make my heart sing a little bit, you know, it's just awesome.
Yeah, it's just being able to make so much progress and push through under such difficult circumstances is really, really good.
Yeah.
It's what we're all here for, is to make these sorts of things and more easier to happen.
It was time really, really well spent. It took me back to, remember when we had the update, the post.
I presume we're still being recorded at the moment.
We are, probably, yeah.
I'm just checking before John says anything. But yeah, it's been a long old haul through, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It is all about the learning.
All about the learning, yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure there is read across, and Leslie's quite right about not homogenising, but there will be things like the flagging on records and things absolutely can be transferred over, can't they?
Definitely.
So there'll be adoption and spread stuff we can do without homogenising.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the work we're doing with people with physical disability, some of the learning from the learning disability is absolutely applicable. It's not the same client group, nor should have the same response, but the learning is absolutely applicable.
Leslie's a great coach on that sort of stuff, and also, you know, not bunching together people with a learning disability and people who are autistic, because again, completely different needs and requirements. So we have to just keep holding that space, don't we, of adoption spread, but no homogenising.
And also, it'll make life a lot easier for everyone involved, I think. It's not just about adding a lot of care, it's about things that you can prevent further down. So it's such a good investment of, you know, adjusting the processes so that they're actually meeting those needs.
Yeah, and I'm talking to Joe about how we link it through now into our mortality and health inequalities groups, and make sure we've got a different level around measuring outcomes. Because although our life expectancy is longer in being assisted, we need to see that improving over time. So that's the next stage with Joe's help, about make sure we actually get that traction around it.
I've realised I've got mood lighting in here. If I'm yawning a lot, it's not the content, it's the fact that it's dark in here to stop the background light blotching me out. It's not anywhere.
It's 5-2 by me, so I think most people are back. So we'll press on if we can. So we've got 3 items left on the agenda. We've got the committee updates, we've got the green plan, and then first of all, we've got the assignment of leadership roles. So Shane, I think you're going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this won't take very long, but as you may know, we are required to identify executives, so people from employees or the ICB. who can be the lead for certain areas, who are there to support me as chief executive, but also to support you as board members in certain areas. You'll see from the list those areas that we are bringing to attention today are children and young people with special education needs, safeguarding, learning disability and Down syndrome. Can I just say, to begin with, clearly in terms of learning disability and autism, having just been through the discussion, there's an error in the paper. It should be Rosie Shepherd, so apologies. But if we can take that out, so apologies, there's an error in that paper. But actually, the reason why we're bringing it is that it's important that you as board members are aware which of the executive team are there to advise and to be the lead, to be your lead. But the reason why I'm bringing the paper, and apart from the fact obviously it needs board approval, is that the guidance that was issued also refers to anyone who is that lead should also be a voting member of the board. And that isn't the way that our exec team is structured. So if I can draw your attention to, on the second page, which is in Diligent, is page 188, under risk and assurance, the guidance requested the leads were a voting member of the ICB board. So in the case of our organisation, that's the chief finance officer from the exec team, chief finance officer, chief nursing officer, chief medical officer, and the chief executive. And what I'm suggesting is, given the subject matter knowledge, so given the fact that SEND, for example, is very much in Lisa's world, children and young people, Lisa's the executive lead for the Health and Care Improvement Group for Children. Having discussed it with Jeff, I think it is more important to get the right technical knowledge and skills to support me and the board, rather than be hamstrung by the fact that Lisa is not a voting member of the board. But I'm raising it because I think it's important we get the right skills and advice and guidance, rather than pick another director who is a voting member, who would have to then seek the guidance and advice and support from the individual who actually is heads up SEND for us, the individual who also is chairing the Health and Care Improvement Group. So I just wanted to raise that risk to that chair, because technically it's not exactly in line with the guidance, but I hope that you would accept that it's more important to get the right skill set and knowledge, as opposed to making sure that they are a voting member of the board. So Chair, the paper is there, I assume read, and I'm happy to take thoughts, comments and questions.
Okay, thanks Shane. I've got Stephen and Julie.
Yeah, no comments other than absolutely right. Skills first. I'm not interested in about the voting stuff. I want the right people with the right skills. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks Steve. Julie? You're on mute, Julie.
Sorry, absolutely agree. Lisa's got all the skills. I suppose I just want to challenge, though, doesn't every ICS have the same voting members? Wasn't that set out that they had to be the voting members? So by then coming out and saying it should be a voting member, there is an expectation it's one of those. But that might be my memory might have gone.
No, they do, Julie, but they don't have the same structures. So we have got an exec team that's structured in a different way to other boards. So every ICB would have a chief medical officer, chief nurse, chief exec, and chief finance officer, but they'd have a range of different directors and different roles. And I mean, I think it's incumbent on us as a board to make sure that the voice is being represented here. And I think that's reliant on us making sure we hold Shane to account. So I actually think if we just go with the guidance and give it to somebody who doesn't have the specialist knowledge or lead on it, we'd make a big mistake.
I get that, and I suppose my second point is it the person or the role? Because if it's the person, then we do have to start thinking about how we share those skills, because obviously you then get a problem, don't you, if that person's no longer there? So is it incumbent? If there was a new director of performance and delivery, would that person hold the role?
And could I answer? This is an individual, not a role, and therefore, if the individuals in roles were to change, I would bring this paper back to the board. Fine. So it's an individual, not a role.
But I would like to add, Lisa's perfect person as far as I'm concerned. I think it's just that wider issue.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Shane. We just need to keep an eye on it, and I think we trust Shane to make sure that we've got the representation at the right level and the right people doing the right things. So is there anybody who doesn't agree with the proposals in the paper about the assignment of the executive roles? No? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the green plan then. Sarah, I think you're going to take us through this.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. We had a requirement to publish a first version of our ICS Green Plan by March 22, and we did that. But because obviously at the time we were still pretty much in the midst of COVID, we wanted to further iterate that and have more engagement with stakeholders to make sure that it was really much more embedded. So what you'll see set out in the paper is the changes that have happened since that first plan that we signed off in March 22. I have to say we're still at the very start of this journey, really, but what's really good is seeing how we're using the skills that we've got in our system, particularly in the 2 acute trusts, to really bring the rest of the system with us now, and particularly starting to use those skills in terms of working more closely with primary care. We are the sort of, in terms of next steps, we are doing work. We've got a workshop this month where we are bringing together with the local authorities to sort of share learning and see what more we can do with that wider partnership. And by September, we are doing more detailed costing of these plans, probably more to make sure that we're able to engage in a debate nationally about some of the challenges that there are, because there is scant funding for this at the moment. There's obviously the public sector decarbonisation schemes, but they are heavily oversubscribed at the moment. So we need to just make sure that we're highlighting what the issues are and having that discussion with the national team so that they understand the challenges that are faced. Those were the key elements I wanted to draw out. Probably just to highlight, page 15 of the main document shows the sources for carbon emissions. So this is very much about getting engagement across the whole system. This isn't just about buildings. It's much more about all of our pathways. So in terms of things like patient travel, but also the medicines and medical equipment that we're using. So it's really trying to get that sort of movement and everybody understanding this. So engagement and building that movement is going to be important. So obviously our focus will be as well on developing further communication around this. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And I know this is for noting for us. I suppose there was a couple of questions that I had around duplication and how joined up we are across the system. And then a final one on, so how do we make sure we embed our review of this into the board, because it's important. And I know we have a requirement to do a green plan, but it doesn't make a great deal of sense if we're all doing a green plan. They're not joined up. We're not looking at how we're collectively doing this across the system, and then we're not monitoring and measuring our performance at board level. So and I know this is complex, but just a query on that one, really. And then okay. I've got Julie and then Steve.
So Jeff, just to come back on that, this is the green plan for all of the NHS partners in the system, and this is in the process of going around all of those individual sovereign boards for sign off. What we're trying to make sure that we're doing is to also work closely with the local authorities who have done quite a significant amount in this area. So we've got both Bristol City Council and South Gloss Council at the next at this workshop, really coming along to share some of that expertise, so we can try and get that even more joined up. So yeah,
okay.
So we're not trying to duplicate this. We're just what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're taking. There has been probably more resource in this space in our 2 acute trusts, and we're trying to take that learning now across the wider health system.
Thanks, Sarah. Julie?
I think my comment was preempting your question, Jeff, actually, was to say we've been very much involved in this. And yesterday we took our green plan, we went through it as executives, and I just wanted to say how transferable it was. Actually, it was one of those plans we didn't then have to sort of think, right, oh, what's that saying? What do we have to write? Actually, by being involved, we were quite able easily to adapt it and then think about the specific actions for us as an organisation. So I think it's a really good example of a system plan that we can then start to have that sort of golden thread coming down. So I just wanted to say thank you for that and to support it.
Okay, thanks, Julia. That's helpful. Steve?
Yeah, it's a good plan, and I think we have the opportunity to think place. So there are other partners, universities are in there, and there's a small paragraph, but actually, if we think about it, if we join this stuff up, we'll have bigger impact. So I think there is a point of us sharing across. The city did the One City plan, which started to do this for us. Maybe we just need to go back and touch on it. The other thing is, we can do a lot of embedding this into curricula, so that as we're developing new parts of the workforce, medicine, nurses, allied health, then if we put information into their programs, the multiplier effect as they come through then into the system is significant. So I think we're missing a trick. I'd be really happy to work across the two universities to try and get them to work effectively alongside, because it's a plan that looks very familiar.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Matt?
Yeah, I was just picking up Steve's point about place, and I guess, and thank you very much for recognising the sort of partnership with local authorities. So I guess it's about how we can continue to give profile to this work within local authorities as well, so we can connect it up with our climate emergency action plans that we all have. So as well as going through the NHS organisations, that continuous awareness, and actually giving credit to NHS organisations for some of the steps that they're taking, because that's what our elected members, particularly for us in North Somerset, with an increased number of Green councillors who have leadership roles within our executive, our cabinet, it'd be really good to be able to do the feedback loops about where things are changing. So happy to pick that offline, but just to recognise that will play well into local authority priorities as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Sarah, does that give you what you need?
Yeah, that's really helpful, Jeff. The only other thing, Matt, it'd be really helpful offline to just work through how we can connect more closely with North Somerset, because that has been a bit of an area of challenge. So thank you.
Okay, so this is an area for board noting, and I think it'll be interesting to hear if the next iteration comes back on this. But is there anything anyone else wants to add before we move on? No? Okay, great. Thanks very much. So if I can move on to the updates from the committees. So start with yourself, Ellen, and then maybe go to exec members if after that. But if I ask the chairs to start off with their update and then move across to exec members.
Thanks, Jeff. So at the committee in June, we tried to create a better balance between the longer term as well as short term, and we had quite a focus on learning disability and autism, as we've heard today. And we also then sort of looked at some of the more short term challenges around the operational plan and current performance. So we've already heard from Rosie, so I won't sort of rehearse that again, but thanks to Rosie for all of that work that you've presented to us today. Joe brought along some work from the Health and Care Professional Executive on tobacco, and Joe, perhaps you might want to sort of expand on that once I've sort of given this quick introduction. We also looked at current performance and discussed in more detail endoscopy, which is previously described as one of the greatest challenges for the system in terms of sort of the current waiting list and elective performance. We were pleased that the team were able to provide assurance of the ICB's focus of highlighting performance, challenges, and what the team are doing across the system to address some of those challenges. So that was a really good session. They sort of talked about things such as tracking the improvement trajectories, the involvement of the independent sector to include endoscopy as an additional to other services, expediting clinical training, and also some specific work from the trusts. So that was endoscopy, and we've agreed to return to that sort of later in the year. And the other point that I just wanted to raise is there's many areas of really good performance. One area remains quite challenging for us, and that's cancer. You may remember that at last board, I updated the board that the committee sought and gained assurance from the team on cancer improvements, and we agreed to focus on 28 FDS. And for those non-NHS partners on the call, 28 FDS is where a citizen should not wait more than 28 days from GP referral to find out whether they have cancer or not. So we agreed to look at that. That number is still sort of stubbornly challenging, and we've agreed with Joe, who's the Chief Medical Officer, that we will pull out some of the dermatology numbers to really understand where we are on those numbers, and it's something we look at in the next committee. So they were my sort of key points, Jeff. I think it might be worth Joe coming in on a couple of them, and Lisa as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So Joe, Rosie and Lisa, any contributions? So Joe?
Yeah, so just to let people know, the Healthcare Professional Executive, which was set up last year as part of national guidance, we've moved really away from the structures, the governance, into actually how do we work together to have impacts on people's lives. And to start that, we're using the long-term plan priorities. So we had our first workshop on smoking and smoking cessation. We used population health data. We looked at the trajectories, the harm, the impact of smoking across our system. And we had that with people who work in smoking and smoking cessation fields across the whole of the system. Very well received. The output of it is there's an agreement to form a BNSSG smoke-free alliance. We'll set a target and a vision for the prevalence of smoking across the wider system, and look at how we work together synergistically in the way we've heard really, I think, around the learning disability cases. How do we bring all of our resources together that the impact is greater than the sum of the parts? That work's now moving forward. Our next one will be on weight and weight management, which is an equally challenged issue at the moment in the system, but we're just starting with smoking. On the 28-day FDS target, I think there is system issues on dermatology which we know about are being managed through a redesign process through the Gateway, working with Lisa's team. But I was just aware that as we look at the targetry that's set out in the operating plan and the joint forward plan, we're at risk from not seeing some of the issues on some of the more solid tumour sites. So just want to disaggregate that and make sure we're not missing a story that sits beneath, because the numbers for dermatology are much higher than the other cancer numbers. So we're doing that work. Lisa's team is pulling some together, and we'll present it into outcomes, performance and quality. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, Joe. That's helpful. Lisa, and then Rosie, whether you want to come in with anything as well.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ellen. I just wanted to highlight, obviously, as part of our performance, we're monitoring our elective plan. Our elective plan was challenging as we set it, as we went into the operational plan this year, and clearly with the ongoing industrial action, we are having an impact on our elective recovery. Clearly that is being managed by both UHBW and MBT, but I just wanted to flag that as an ongoing risk as we work through this year in terms of our ability to deliver our elective recovery, particularly against all the standards, and as we then move to really monitoring against 40 weeks will become a challenge as we move forward through this year.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Rosie, anything you want to add?
Just through the system quality group, we're doing a focused piece of work of understanding delay-related harm and what improvement activity we need to do and what mitigation activity we need to do. So we had a good first session with presentation from UHBW colleagues this week, and then we're going to go through different parts of the system and make sure we then triangulate that. So a good conversation, but focused on improvement and mitigation.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. I don't know whether board members have any further questions around the work in the Quality and Outcomes Committee. Alison, I'll bring you in a second. Just so board members are aware, as a non-exec group, we're now meeting monthly to make sure there's the read across between committees. So of the committees that they're not duplicating effort, and that we do know there's a thread, if there's a thread running through them, that the chairs have got a grip of that. So that is starting to make us a bit more informed, I think, about the way that we're actually working. Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. It's just on the upcoming industrial action. I'm absolutely confident that everybody in the room who has a role is very good at it, because there's been a lot of practice around preparing for industrial action. This one seems a bit longer, and I think I was told it was something like 10 Christmas days in a row or something, Christmas Day services in a row. Is there anything specific that we would want the public to do or know different to previous times in terms of communications to people about right place care at the right time?
So who's best to answer that?
I'll answer it, Jeff.
Yeah.
So the comms team have been working with me, Alison. I've done 2 videos. I did one yesterday with a refreshed, updated advice to the public. They put that on various social media platforms. I think it was on the regional news at one point. So they're popping, and it's just the simple message is make sure you prepare, get your repeat prescriptions. If you need care, use 111 online, use 999 only for emergency.